Across the ancient islands of Japan, in the shadows of mountains, and along the quiet rivers, stories have always lived. Villages carried them through whispers by firelight. Priests recorded them in temple scrolls, and travelers passed them from inn to inn as warnings for the road ahead. These stories were not just entertainment, nor were they mere diversions for sleepless nights. They were explanations of the world, binding unseen dangers to familiar places. Every forest path, every lonely bridge, every abandoned house could conceal a presence that was both feared and respected. In these stories, the barrier between the human and the supernatural is fragile, easily pierced by a chance encounter. The people of Japan have long understood their land as a place alive with spirits, demons, and restless souls. The term used to describe them, Yōkai, stretches far and wide. It can mean a monster, a ghost, a strange apparition, or simply an inexplicable occurrence. The world of Yōkai is not neat or orderly. It is a shifting collection of beings drawn from ancient beliefs, Buddhist teachings, Shinto rituals, and the imaginations of countless storytellers. Some are terrifying, towering figures that strike down entire communities. Others are small, mischievous creatures that lurk in kitchens or streams, more nuisance than threat. What unites them is their place in the Japanese imagination as explanations for everything that could not otherwise be explained. A sudden illness, a storm that ruined the harvest, the disappearance of a child, or the echo of footsteps on an empty road could all be attributed to them. In this twilight realm, there is a category of spirit that strikes deeper fear than most. These are not wandering tricksters or elemental beings, but the restless dead. In Japan, the belief in the spirit world has always been closely tied to the rituals of death and remembrance. To die without peace, without closure, or without proper rites is to risk becoming something far more dangerous than an ordinary ghost. These are the Onryō, spirits of vengeance, beings bound to the world of the living by the intensity of their rage and sorrow. The image of an Onryō is instantly recognizable. In the imagination of both ancient storytellers and modern audiences, they are women more often than men, their black hair long and unkempt, cascading over a face pale as chalk. Their white burial kimono clings to their form, and their eyes burn with an expression of grief twisted into fury. The Onryō does not wander aimlessly. She is not a shadow that drifts without purpose. She has a target, and that target is the living who wronged her. Her stories often begin with betrayal, abuse, or cruelty. A wife abandoned, a concubine poisoned by jealousy, a servant mistreated by her master. In life, she could do nothing, trapped by custom, powerless within the confines of her role. But in death, she is released, and the balance of power reverses. The once helpless victim becomes the merciless hunter. One of the most famous tales is that of Oiwa. She was a woman of great beauty, married to a samurai named Aiemon. At first, her life seemed secure, but Aiemon's ambition and greed slowly poisoned their marriage. He desired another woman, one of higher status, and to rid himself of Oiwa, he conspired with others to slip poison into her food. The venom disfigured her face, twisting her once graceful features into a mask of horror. Betrayed, humiliated, and mutilated, she lingered in torment until her death. But death was not her end. It was her release. From her grave she rose as an Onryō, her ruined face a mark of her suffering, her presence filled with rage. No matter where Aiemon went, Oiwa followed. Her image appeared in lanterns, her voice whispered in the night, her reflections surfaced in mirrors and water. She drove him into madness, until at last he met his destruction, undone by the very woman he had thought powerless. This story has been told for centuries, not just in spoken folklore, but in theatre. The kabuki play Yotsuya Kaidan immortalized Oiwa, and her image as a vengeful ghost has seeped into Japanese culture so deeply that even modern horror films like The Ring or Ju-On carry her shadow. The figure of the long-haired, pale-faced spirit is not an invention of cinema, but the continuation of an older fear that has never left. Onryō serve as more than just frightening figures. They are symbols of moral consequence. In their stories, cruelty never goes unpunished. The sins of betrayal, greed, and abuse call forth a reckoning that no temple prayer can fully dispel. Rituals of appeasement exist, of course. Shrines built to calm the angry dead, priests hired to perform rites to soothe them. But the core truth remains that the wronged spirit cannot easily be silenced. In a society built on order, loyalty, and respect, the Onryō embodied the terror of broken bonds and the chaos of human cruelty unleashed. Not all restless spirits are driven by vengeance alone. Some linger not to punish, but because they cannot leave. These are the Yūrei, ghosts bound by unfinished business or improper funerary rites. Where the Onryō storms into the living world with violence, the Yūrei often drifts, pale and uncertain, tethered to the place of their sorrow. The distinction between them is thin, but important. A Yūrei is sorrowful, often tragic, while an Onryō is active, wrathful, and relentless. Japanese funerary customs evolved with these fears in mind. To die without proper rites, to be forgotten by one's descendants, or to perish in isolation risked leaving the soul restless. Ancestor veneration was more than respect. It was a form of spiritual maintenance. The yearly festival of Obon, when families light lanterns and welcome the spirits of their ancestors back for a brief visit, reflects this deep connection. It is an act of remembrance and reassurance, a way to ensure that the departed remain honored and peaceful rather than restless and dangerous. In countless stories, the Yūrei appear at night near bridges, rivers, or abandoned homes. Their form is fragile, with no feet, their bodies tapering off into wisps, an image so common it became standard in art and theatre. Their arms hang limply before them, their hands often claw-like or limp. Unlike the Western ghost, who might wander a castle or moan in a graveyard, the Yūrei carries an aura of profound sadness. To encounter one is to feel the weight of unfinished grief pressing into the air. There is a famous tale of Okiku, a servant at Himeji Castle. She discovered a plot of treason involving her master and was falsely accused of losing one of the household's treasured porcelain plates. For this, she was thrown into a well and left to die. From then on, her voice was said to echo from that well, counting the plates again and again, never able to reach the missing one. Her sorrow bound her to the site, and travelers at night would hear her mournful counting drift across the grounds. This tale of Okiku became so well known that her well is still pointed out to visitors today, a reminder of the price of injustice and the persistence of memory in stone and water. The persistence of such spirits reveals something central about Japanese folklore. It is not merely about monsters lurking in the dark, but about the ties between the living and the dead, and the consequences of forgetting or betraying them. The fear is not only of the ghost itself, but of what neglect or cruelty will awaken. Among the spirits of vengeance and sorrow, there are others whose danger comes not from betrayal, but from seduction. The world of Japanese folklore is filled with beings that blend beauty with danger, luring mortals into webs they cannot escape. One of the most striking of these is the Jorōgumo, the spider woman. She is said to appear as a breathtakingly beautiful woman, her grace so overwhelming that travelers cannot resist following her. But behind this mask lies her true nature, a monstrous spider of immense size and strength. The Jorōgumo's lair is often placed near waterfalls, where the sound of rushing water masks the cries of her victims. A young man walking alone might encounter her in human form, gentle and inviting, leading him into her home. Once there, she ensnares him, binding him in silk as easily as an insect. Her beauty fades to reveal her monstrous body, and the victim becomes a meal. In some tales, she does not even hide her nature, but strikes directly, her silk strong enough to drag men into the depths of rivers or bind them high in trees. The Spider-Woman represents a deep-seated fear of entrapment, of beauty concealing danger. She is also connected to the anxieties of sexuality and seduction. Her stories often told as warnings against being led astray by desire. Yet she is not always portrayed as purely malevolent. In some local variations, she protects certain villages or spares those who treat her kindly. Her duality, both beautiful and monstrous, makes her one of the most enduring figures in the Japanese folkloric imagination. From the haunting cries of Onryō to the drifting forms of Yūrei, from the tragic well of Okiku to the seductive snares of the Jorōgumo, the spirit world of Japan reveals itself not as a distant realm, but as something deeply interwoven with daily life. It lingers in wells, on lonely roads, by mountain waterfalls, and in the very households where people once lived and died. These beings are more than tales to frighten children. They are warnings, explanations, and reminders of the fragile boundary between the human world and the realm of the unseen. And as the snow begins to fall on the mountain passes and the cold winds sweep across the countryside, another presence stirs, her breath carried on the winter storm. In the long history of Japan's storytelling, no spirit carries as much dread as the Onryō, the vengeful dead who return not to wander, but to punish. They are the embodiment of rage carried past the grave, the terror that cruelty in life never truly ends with death. Where other spirits might drift with sorrow or simply haunt a place, the Onryō acts with purpose. It seeks the living, hunts them, and makes them feel the weight of their betrayal. To hear their names spoken around firelight was to feel a chill settle over the room, for the stories reminded listeners that nothing remains buried forever. The Onryō is not a distant phantom of the imagination. It has been seen countless times in stories told across centuries, and its features are always recognizable. The long, loose black hair falling around a pale, grief-stricken face. The white burial kimono, a robe traditionally worn by the dead. The eyes wide and fixed with an expression that is not just sorrow, but fury turned against the living. These spirits appear most often as women. In a society where women's voices could be ignored and their suffering dismissed, the Onryō became a symbol of what could not be silenced. In life, powerless. In death, unstoppable. The most famous of these stories is that of Oiwa. Her tale begins, like many, with a marriage that should have been secure. She was the wife of a samurai named Yemon, a man whose ambition outweighed his loyalty. Oiwa's beauty was once her blessing, but it became her curse. Yemon saw a chance for wealth and power in marrying another woman, and so he plotted his wife's death. The poison slipped into her meal disfigured her horribly. Her eye bulged, her skin sagged, her once serene face twisted beyond recognition. Broken in body, betrayed by the man sworn to protect her, she lingered in agony before finally dying. but death freed her in a way life never had. What rose from her grave was no longer the helpless woman who had been silenced. Oiwa returned with the strength of her fury made flesh. Her ruined face became her weapon, a mask of horror that would never allow Yemon to forget what he had done. Wherever he turned, she appeared. In the flicker of a lantern, her face surfaced. In his reflection on water, her eyes stared back. At night, her whispering voice tormented him until he descended into madness and ruin. In the end, it was her hand, unseen and unstoppable, that brought about his destruction. Her story became immortal on the kabuki stage. The play Yotsuya Kaiden retold her tale with such vivid imagery that audiences gasped in terror. Painted masks, wild hair, and grotesque makeup brought Oiwa's ghost to life, and her image set the template for the Onryō for centuries to follow. Even today, her presence echoes in modern horror. The terrifying ghosts of the Ring and Ju-On are not new inventions, but descendants of Oiwa, carrying her long black hair, pale skin, and relentless pursuit into the present. The image is so deeply rooted in Japanese imagination that it continues to thrive, a reminder of how old fears never truly vanish. But Oiwa is not the only Onryō to haunt the annals of history and myth. Another is Otsuyu, remembered in the tale Botandoro, the Peony Lantern. A man named Ogiwara fell in love with a woman of striking beauty who appeared each evening at his house, carrying a lantern painted with peonies. They spent their nights together in passion, her beauty so overwhelming that he thought nothing of her strange behavior, yet neighbors whispered of odd sounds and strange sights. Eventually, a friend peered into Ogiwara's home one night and saw the truth. The beautiful woman was a corpse, her flesh rotting, her form barely human, clinging to him in the darkness. By then, it was too late. Ogiwara had fallen under her spell, bound by her ghostly embrace, and he wasted away until death claimed him as well. This tale of Otsuyu reveals the seductive danger of the Onryō. It is not always rage expressed in shrieks and horrors. Sometimes it is a quieter, more insidious grip, the kind that drains life from the victim willingly. The allure of the ghost, the promise of beauty or love beyond the grave, becomes the weapon by which the living are destroyed. The lantern, glowing in the night, is not just a symbol of light, but of a path that leads into darkness with no return. The idea of the Onryō extends beyond personal vengeance. In some traditions, entire families or communities fall under their curse. Earthquakes, fires, and plagues were once explained as the work of these spirits. Their wrath so powerful, it shook the land itself. This belief gave rise to rituals of appeasement. Shrines were built not only to honor the peaceful dead, but to calm those whose rage threatened to spill over. Temples dedicated to wronged souls became places where offerings were made, prayers whispered, and memorials held, all to prevent their return. One of the most enduring of these memorials surrounds the story of Sugawara no Mishizane, a scholar and court official from the Heian period. Betrayed by rivals and exiled, he died far from the capital, his life consumed by injustice. Soon after his death, disasters plagued the city, storms, droughts, and fires that destroyed entire districts. People believed it was Mishizane's furious spirit taking revenge. To appease him, he was posthumously restored to honor, and shrines were built to him as Tenjin, a kami of learning. Here we see the blending of fear and reverence, where an Onryō could become a god, transformed from a vengeful spirit into a divine protector through the power of ritual and memory. The power of the Onryō rests in more than superstition. It embodies the deep anxieties of a society where order and loyalty were paramount. Betrayal was not just a personal wound, it was a disruption of harmony, a crack in the foundation of community. The ghost that rises to avenge betrayal is a reminder that such cracks cannot be ignored. They fester, they spread, and they return in forms no one can control. To encounter an Onryō in story is to witness the reversal of power. A woman ignored in life cannot be ignored in death. A victim silenced finds her voice as a scream that carries across generations. This inversion is terrifying precisely because it is unstoppable. No guard can keep her out. No sword can cut her down. No door can be locked against her. She is the past, risen and alive, demanding to be acknowledged. In villages, the fear of such spirits wove itself into daily life. A sudden sickness might be seen as the work of an Onryō. A crop failure, a fire, or even a streak of misfortune in a household could be traced back to a wronged soul seeking revenge. Families might hire priests to perform elaborate ceremonies to soothe the spirit. Offerings of incense, food, and water were placed on small altars to appease the unseen. And yet, the dread remained. No matter how many rituals were performed, no one could ever be fully sure the ghost had been silenced. This lingering uncertainty is what makes the Onryō so potent. Unlike creatures of the wild or trickster spirits, they are not bound to forests, rivers, or mountains. They come into homes, into families, into the most personal spaces. They haunt not only the world, but the conscience, a reminder of cruelty committed, debts unpaid, and wrongs unresolved. Over time, the fear of Onryō shaped even the way stories were told. Ghost tales became an art form, particularly during the Edo period. They were told in summer, when the heat weighed heavily on the air, and the chill of a ghost story provided a shiver of relief. Performers would lower their voices, dim the lights, and let the candlelight flicker as they described the long hair, the pale skin, the whisper at the edge of the listener's ear. These gatherings were not just entertainment, they were a cultural ritual, a way of engaging with the unseen, of reminding everyone present that the dead were never truly gone. The Onryō remains one of the clearest bridges between traditional folklore and modern horror. Every pale figure with dark hair in cinema, every story of a vengeful woman returning from the grave carries the imprint of these older tales. And yet, beyond the stage and the screen, the fear endures in quieter ways. The old wells, the shrines, the lonely gravesides at the edges of villages still hold their power. The silence of such places is heavy, as though the earth itself remembers. And so the Onryō lingers, a figure born from betrayal, given shape by grief, and carried forward by centuries of fear. But they are only one part of the vast host of Japanese spirits, for not all the dead return in fury. Some come back in sorrow, drawn not by vengeance but by longing, bound to the world by ties that have not yet been severed. If the Onryō is the spirit of fury and vengeance, then the Yūrei is its quieter, more sorrowful counterpart. These are not beings who return with rage alone, but with longing, confusion, or unfinished ties that keep them tethered to the human world. Their presence in Japanese folklore reflects not only fear of the supernatural, but also deep cultural anxieties about death, burial, and memory. The difference may seem subtle, but it is profound. The Onryō punishes, the Yūrei mourns, both haunt, but the way they linger tells us much about the values of the society that gave them life. The very word Yūrei translates to faint spirit or dim soul. They are figures that hover at the edge of perception, neither fully present nor entirely gone. Their existence is tied to ritual, or rather to the absence of it. In Japan, funerary practices are not just custom, but necessity. A soul improperly honored cannot find its way to peace. Without the careful performance of rites, without prayers to guide the dead, the spirit wanders, lost and unfulfilled. This is the root of the Yūrei, a soul caught between worlds because something essential was neglected. In appearance, they are instantly recognizable. Artists and storytellers for centuries have depicted them with white burial kimono, hair long and unbound, faces pale and hollow. Their arms hang unnaturally before them, wrists limp, hands often twisted in claw-like gestures. Most tellingly, their bodies taper into nothingness with no feet to ground them. This floating form became the standard in Japanese art and theatre, ensuring that audiences knew at a glance that what they beheld was a ghost. These images are not arbitrary. They arise from real funerary customs. The white kimono is the garment of death, the hair let down as it would be in burial, the lack of feet a symbolic sign of disconnection from the earth. Every detail reinforces that this is not simply a dead person, but a soul lost to the rituals that should have guided them onward. The stories of Yūrei are many, and they often begin with tragedy. A life cut short, a betrayal unresolved, a ritual incomplete. One of the most enduring tales is that of Okiku at Himeji Castle. She was a servant, loyal and diligent, but caught in a cruel trap of power. Her master falsely accused her of losing one of 10 treasured porcelain plates, an unforgivable mistake. For this supposed failure, she was beaten and thrown into a well to die. But death did not silence her. From the depths of the well, her voice rose, night after night, counting the plates. 1, 2, 3, until 9, and then a wail for the missing 10th. Her voice carried across the castle grounds, filling the air with grief that could not be resolved. The well still stands today, and visitors are reminded of the story every time they look down into its darkness. The tale of Okiku is more than just a ghost story. It is a warning about injustice, about cruelty inflicted upon the powerless. The counting of plates becomes a symbol of an unresolved wrong, repeated endlessly because it was never corrected. The Yūrei does not kill, as the Onryō might, but it cannot rest. Its presence unsettles, reminding the living of what they failed to do. Another famous Yūrei appears in the story of Otsuyu and her peony lantern, a tale that has been retold countless times in literature and theatre. A man encounters a beautiful woman who visits him night after night, her form illuminated by the glow of a lantern painted with peonies. Their nights together are filled with passion and joy, but her beauty hides the truth. She is long dead, and her embrace is slowly draining the life from him. By the time the truth is revealed, it is too late. He dies, consumed by his love for a spirit who could never release him. This story reveals another aspect of the Yūrei, the danger of longing itself. The man is not attacked but willingly ensnared, unable to resist the pull of the dead. His fate is tragic not because of violence but because he could not let go. The persistence of Yūrei in Japanese folklore reflects a society deeply concerned with the duties of the living toward the dead. Ancestor veneration is not optional. It is a sacred responsibility. Festivals such as Obon ensure that the spirits are remembered, welcomed back for a brief visit, and then guided back to the other world with lanterns and prayers. To fail in these duties is to invite restlessness, to risk leaving a soul behind. In this sense, Yūrei are not merely frightening apparitions. They are reminders of obligation, of the thin thread that binds families across generations. The Buddhist influence on these stories is also strong. In Buddhist teaching, attachment is a source of suffering. To cling to the world after death is to remain trapped in illusion. The Yūrei embodies this truth. They are not free because they cannot let go of love, of anger, of grief, or of a life cut short. Their existence is a cautionary tale, illustrating the dangers of desire and attachment that extend beyond the grave. One particularly striking aspect of Yūrei lore is how their presence has been codified in theatre, especially in kabuki, and later in ghost plays of No. The conventions of their appearance, the pale makeup, the long hair, the slow floating movements, were carefully designed to evoke unease. Audiences came to expect these signs, and the moment they saw them, they knew they were in the presence of a ghost. These conventions shaped the visual culture of Japan so deeply that even today, when people imagine a Japanese ghost, it is the Yūrei they see. Cinema, manga, and even video games carry this image forward, making it one of the most enduring legacies of folklore in modern storytelling. But while the theatre formalized their appearance, the countryside kept their presence alive in other ways. Countless folk tales describe travelers encountering Yūrei on lonely roads, fishermen seeing them along riverbanks, or villagers hearing them wail in abandoned houses. Their manifestations vary, but they are always tied to place. A bridge where someone drowned, a home where someone died alone, a battlefield littered with unburied corpses. The landscape itself holds memory, and the Yūrei are its voice. The bond between spirit and place can be so strong that entire regions become associated with haunting. Old temples, wells, forests, and lakes are often tied to specific tales, each said to harbour the restless dead. Travellers were warned not to linger in certain areas after dark, not because of wild animals or bandits, but because of the spirits that claimed those places. The stories served both as entertainment and as cautionary tales, guiding behaviour in subtle but powerful ways. The danger of the Yūrei is not always physical harm. Sometimes it is psychological, a slow erosion of peace. A house thought to be haunted might see its inhabitants waste away, not from ghostly attack, but from the fear, anxiety, and sleepless nights that followed the belief. The mere idea of a spirit's presence could unravel a community, showing the profound grip these stories held on the human mind. And yet, for all their sorrow, there is also compassion in these tales. The Yūrei is not a monster to be slain, but a soul to be remembered, appeased, or guided. Priests are called not to banish them, but to help them move on. Offerings of incense, food, and water are placed not to ward them off, but to comfort them. In this way, the Yūrei embodies a worldview where the dead are not enemies, but responsibilities. To encounter one is terrifying, but it is also a reminder to fulfill duties left undone. Even in modern Japan, the presence of Yūrei lingers in cultural memory. Obon remains a major festival, a time when families gather to honor ancestors, light lanterns, and guide spirits back to the other side. Haunted places are still treated with respect, and ghost stories remain a staple of summer gatherings. The pale, floating form of the Yūrei continues to drift through literature, film, and urban legend, a figure as recognizable today as it was centuries ago. From the fury of the Onryō to the sorrow of the Yūrei, we see two faces of the restless dead. One strikes with vengeance, the other lingers with grief. Both are born from a disruption of order, from betrayals of duty, from failures in life and death. They remind us that the boundary between the living and the dead is fragile, and that our obligations to one another do not end with the grave. And as the stories of the dead whisper through villages and cities alike, the living turn their eyes to another kind of figure, one not bound to grief alone, but to the snow and the bitter cold of winter. In the mountains and lonely roads where frost clings to the earth, a woman of ice waits for the unwary, her presence as beautiful as it is deadly. Among the many beings that wander through the shadows of Japanese folklore, few are as unsettling as those who mask themselves in beauty. These are creatures whose first approach inspires wonder, not fear, and who draw the living closer, not by force, but by desire. And of all the spirits that take such a form, none embody this tension more vividly than the Jorōgumo, the spider woman. Her story begins in the everyday world of nature, in the small and ordinary spiders that lurk in corners of homes and in the quiet spaces of the forest. Folklore holds that a simple ground spider, if it lives long enough, will change. After centuries, its body swells with unnatural power. The creature learns to disguise itself, weaving illusions as easily as silk. The ordinary becomes extraordinary, and the small becomes terrifying. The Jorōgumo is born from this transformation, stepping out of the shadows of the natural world into the role of predator in the world of men. Her form is deceptive. To the traveler walking a lonely path, she appears as a woman of extraordinary beauty, her face pale, her figure graceful, her manner gentle and inviting. She may be seen near waterfalls, streams, or quiet glades, places where the sound of rushing water or the solitude of nature lowers the guard of the weary. She greets her victim softly, and the encounter feels less like a chance meeting than a fated moment. Few could resist the invitation of such a figure in such a setting. But behind this mask lies her true body, a massive spider with venomous fangs and limbs capable of binding a human as easily as a fly. When she lures a man to her lair, the illusion collapses. What seemed a lover's embrace becomes the tightening grip of silk. The victim is ensnared, drained, and left as a husk, just one more meal in her endless hunger. The stories of the Jorōgumo often place her lair near waterfalls. The sound of water plays a role in her deception, masking the cries of those she captures. In one of the most famous locations, the Joran Falls in Izu, local tradition speaks of men vanishing near the cascade. They were said to have been seduced and consumed by the spider woman, their disappearance explained by the invisible strands of her web stretched across the rocks. To this day, signs warn visitors not to approach too closely, echoing a caution born centuries ago. The danger of the Jorōgumo is not simply her hunger, but her mastery of illusion. She is said to conjure not only beauty, but entire scenes. A victim might see a welcoming home, a gathering of friends, or even hear the sound of music. Yet in reality, he is alone, ensnared by threads too fine to notice until it is too late. Some tales describe her weaving webs so subtle that they attach to a man's clothing without his awareness, binding him with every step until he cannot escape. Her weapon is desire itself. Unlike the raw terror of a skeleton giant or the cold fury of a vengeful ghost, her danger lies in the weakness of the living, in the way people are drawn to beauty, warmth, and companionship. In this way, she is more than a monster. She is a mirror of human vulnerability. Every story about her is also a story about the ease with which longing can turn into ruin. One tale tells of a young samurai who stopped to rest by a stream. He saw a beautiful woman washing her hair, her long black strands glistening in the sunlight. She smiled at him, inviting him closer. Entranced, he followed, only to glimpse, just for a moment, a reflection in the water that revealed her true form. He fled, and when he returned with companions, they found only strands of silk stretched across the trees, thick as rope, strong enough to bind an ox. The story serves as a warning. What appears beautiful by the river's edge may hide a far more terrible truth. The Jorōgumo is not always portrayed as purely evil. In some regional variations, she takes on a role closer to guardian than predator. In certain villages, she is said to have spared those who treated her with respect, protecting local shrines, or even ensuring the safety of children near rivers. In these versions, her hunger is tempered by morality, and she becomes a figure of awe rather than pure terror. These variations reveal the fluidity of folklore, where the same being can be seen as monster or protector, depending on the needs and fears of the community that tells the tale. Still, the darker stories dominate. They speak of men lured into long affairs with women who were not women at all, only to waste away as their life was slowly drained. In some accounts, the victim never even realizes he is ensnared until the end. He sees only the face of his lover, never the fangs hidden behind the illusion, until he is too weak to resist. The web is both literal and symbolic, a prison woven from desire and deception. The symbolism of the Jorōgumo runs deep. In many cultures, spiders are seen as patient hunters, silent and methodical. In Japan, that image is fused with anxieties about sexuality and seduction. The spider woman becomes a metaphor for the dangers of lust, of being led astray by beauty, of trusting appearances too easily. For men in particular, the stories serve as warnings about the perils of seeking pleasure without caution. But the fear goes beyond morality. It touches on something more primal, the terror of being trapped, unable to move, consumed not in a moment, but slowly, while fully aware of one's fate. The kabuki stage, which brought so many supernatural figures into popular imagination, embraced the Jorōgumo as well. Plays depicted her transformations with elaborate costumes and stage effects. A woman's graceful figure would suddenly reveal monstrous limbs. Silken threads would drop from above, and the audience would gasp as the predator emerged from the guise of beauty. These performances reinforced her place in the collective imagination, turning local tales into national icons. Artists, too, found fascination in her. Edo period prints depict spider women in both alluring and terrifying forms, sometimes fully human, sometimes monstrous, and sometimes caught mid-transformation. The duality of her form, half beauty, half beast, captured the essence of her story. It was not the horror of a beast alone, but the shock of realizing that what you thought was safe and inviting was nothing but a trap. Some scholars suggest that the Jorōgumo embodies fears about women's independence and sexuality during periods when social order demanded obedience and control. In this view, her legend is a projection of male anxiety, the fear that a woman's allure could undermine duty, drain strength, and lead to ruin. Whether or not this was the conscious intent of the storytellers, the image persists, revealing how folklore often reflects the deeper tensions of the society that creates it. Yet the Jorōgumo also embodies resilience and power. Unlike many women in folklore who suffer betrayal and return only as ghosts, she is never a victim. She is a predator, a figure of agency and danger in her own right. Her stories may warn against desire, but they also acknowledge a being who cannot be easily dismissed or defeated. This complexity is part of what has kept her alive in imagination for centuries. Even today, the legend of the Spider Woman lingers. Tourists who visit Joran Falls hear her story told as part of the landscape, a tale that deepens the sense of danger in the roar of the water and the mist rising from the rocks. In literature, film, and anime, the Jorōgumo continues to appear, sometimes as a villain, sometimes as a tragic figure, always as a reminder of the thin line between allure and danger. Her presence speaks to something universal in human fear, the dread of deception, the terror of being ensnared by what we most desire. The Spider-Woman does not need brute force or overwhelming power. She waits, patient and silent, weaving her web until the victim walks into it willingly. And once caught, there is no escape. From the shadows of her webs and the mist of her waterfalls, the path through Japanese folklore winds onward. The mountains rise, covered in dark forests, their peaks hidden in cloud. And in those mountains dwell beings no less dangerous, but of an entirely different kind. They are not seducers, but warriors and tricksters, spirits of air and storm whose pride is as fierce as their power. When the air turns sharp and the snow begins to blanket the earth, another figure steps into the stories of Japan, one whose presence is as beautiful as it is deadly. She is the Yuki-Onna, the Snow Woman, and her legend drifts across centuries like the winter winds that carry her name. Few spirits are as hauntingly memorable. Where the Onryō embodies rage and the Jorōgumo deception, the Yuki-Onna embodies the silence of snow itself, calm, ethereal, and merciless. Her appearance is described with consistency across countless tales. She is tall, more graceful than any human, her skin pale as frost, her eyes dark and cold, and her long hair flowing like midnight against the whiteness of snow. She wears a white kimono, though some say it is not fabric at all, but the snow and mist gathered around her form. In the dim light of the moon, she seems to glow, a vision so striking that travelers often mistake her for a goddess. But the beauty of the Yuki-Onna is a mask of ice. Her presence is always an omen of death. The most common setting for her stories is the mountain pass or the lonely road during a snowstorm. Japan's winters could be brutal, and for travelers, the threat of freezing to death was ever present. The Yuki-Onna gave a face to that danger. In the stories, she appears suddenly, gliding across the snow without leaving a trace of footprints. Her movements are silent, almost dreamlike. She approaches the weary, the lost, or the foolish who wander into the storm. Sometimes she offers comfort, sometimes a kiss, but her touch is always the same, cold enough to stop a heart. Victims are found the next morning, lifeless in the snow, their bodies pale, their expressions frozen as though in a final moment of awe or terror. One of the most famous versions of her tale comes from Lafcadio Hearn's Kwaidan, a collection of Japanese ghost stories recorded in the late 19th century. In it, two woodcutters are caught in a sudden blizzard. They take shelter in a hut, but as the night deepens, a strange figure enters. She is radiant and terrible, the Yuki-Onna herself. She leans over one of the men and breathes her icy breath upon him, killing him instantly. When she turns to the younger man, she pauses. Struck by his youth and beauty, she spares him, but not without warning. She commands him never to speak of what he has seen. Years later, when he is married and settled, he tells his wife the story of that night. As he speaks, she changes before his eyes. The woman he loved becomes the Yuki-Onna once more. Enraged by his broken promise, she nearly kills him, but for the sake of their children, she vanishes instead, leaving behind only the cold air of the night. This version of the story illustrates the Yuki-Onna's duality. She's not simply a killer, but a figure bound by rules and emotions. She spares, but she also punishes betrayal. She can show compassion, but it is fleeting, fragile as ice under the morning sun. Her beauty captivates, but but it is a beauty that cannot be trusted, for beneath it lies the inevitability of death. In other regions, her character shifts. In some, she is a merciless predator who delights in freezing travelers, feeding on their life force as easily as the cold feeds on warmth. In others, she appears as a tragic figure, a lonely woman cursed to wander forever in snow. Some tales even describe her as a mother carrying a child in her arms, luring villagers to take the infant in, only for them to find it is nothing but a bundle of ice. The variations reveal the richness of Japanese folklore, where a single figure can embody terror, tragedy, and beauty all at once. The Yuki-Onna is also tied to natural phenomena. Snowstorms, avalanches, and sudden freezes all carried her name. If a traveler vanished in the snow, it was said the Yuki-Onna had claimed them. The silence of the mountains after a heavy snowfall was her domain, a silence that could feel suffocating, heavy with the presence of something unseen. In this way, she became not just a character, but a personification of winter itself, a season that could nurture with its beauty, but destroy with its cold. Her presence is not always confined to the wilderness. Some stories place her in villages, appearing at night to knock on doors, asking to be let in. To refuse her is dangerous, but to accept her invitation is worse. Once inside, she breathes out her icy mist, freezing the household in their sleep. In these stories, she is not bound to the storm, but carries it with her, a living embodiment of the cold that seeps into homes during the harshest months. The Yuki-Onna's role in folklore also reflects cultural fears about isolation and survival. In rural Japan, winter was a season of hardship. Food was scarce, roads were blocked, and the cold claimed lives each year. The Yuki-Onna was a way of explaining these losses, of giving them meaning. She reminded people of the dangers of wandering too far from the hearth, of underestimating the power of the elements, of the thin line between life and death in the cold. At the same time, her beauty gave these warnings a strange allure. Unlike a beast or demon, she does not terrify with grotesque features. She terrifies by being irresistible, by drawing the living toward her even as she leads them to their end. This paradox makes her one of the most compelling figures in Japanese folklore. She is both feared and admired, both monster and vision. The theatre embraced her as it did other spirits. Performers appeared in flowing white robes, their movements slow and gliding, their breath misting in the cold air of the stage. Audiences shivered, not only from the stories themselves, but from the atmosphere created around them. The Yuki-Onna was not a ghost to scream or wail, but one to silence an audience with awe, to leave them unsettled by beauty that concealed death. Artists, too, captured her in countless forms. Prints show her standing against snowy landscapes, her form almost indistinguishable from the drifting snowflakes around her. Sometimes she is alone, other times she hovers over a fallen traveler, her hand raised as if in blessing or in death. These images emphasize her otherworldly nature, blending her into the environment until it is impossible to tell where the snow ends and she begins. What is striking about the Yuki-Onna is her endurance. While many spirits remain tied to specific villages or regions, her legend spread widely across Japan. From Niigata to Yamagata, from Tohoku to the central mountains, she is known wherever the snow falls heavy. This universality speaks to the shared experience of winter in Japan, and to the shared need to explain its dangers. Even today, the Yuki-Onna remains alive in the imagination. Modern films, anime, and literature continue to reimagine her, sometimes as a horror figure, sometimes as a tragic heroine, sometimes even as a romantic presence. Yet no matter the interpretation, her essence remains the same, a woman of snow and beauty, whose touch is death. Her place in folklore reveals something profound about human fear. It is not only the grotesque that terrifies, but the beautiful. It is not only violence that destroys, but the quiet, silent cold. The Yuki-Onna stands at the crossroads of attraction and annihilation, embodying the truth that what we most long for may also be what undoes us. And as the snow melts and the rivers swell with spring rains, the dangers of the land shift as well. For where the mountains once held the Yuki-Onna, the rivers and marshes carry their own spirits, creatures who lurk beneath the surface, waiting for the careless and the curious to step too close to the water's edge. When the snows retreat from the mountains and the rivers surge with spring rains, another presence emerges in the imagination of Japan. Not a towering figure of beauty like the Yuki-Onna, nor a sorrowful ghost bound by grief, but a creature smaller, stranger, and more mischievous. These are the Kappa, the water spirits of rivers, ponds, and marshes, whose legends ripple through the countryside like the currents they inhabit. To some, they are comical tricksters. To others, they are sinister predators. Their stories blend humor with horror, delight with dread, and through them, water itself becomes a place of danger. The Kappa's form is one of the most distinctive in Japanese folklore. They are small, roughly the size of a child, with bodies that mix human and animal features. Their skin is scaly and often tinged green or blue. Their hands and feet are webbed for swimming, and their mouths are sharp and beak-like. But most recognizable of all is the depression in the top of their heads, a dish-like hollow filled with water. This water is the source of their strength, the essence of their life force. Should it spill or dry out, the Kappa becomes weak, powerless, and even unable to move. This strange detail gave rise to countless stories where clever villagers managed to defeat or escape a Kappa by forcing it to bow, spilling its water, and robbing it of its power. The name Kappa itself means river child, and this is exactly how they behave. Like unruly children, they are mischievous, restless, and often dangerous when unsupervised. They lurk by riverbanks, waiting for victims who stray too close. At their mildest, they are pranksters, snatching cucumbers from gardens, startling horses, or pulling swimmers under the water only to release them, laughing at their terror. At their worst, they are killers, dragging humans into the depths, drowning them, and devouring them. The connection between Kappa and drowning was no coincidence. Japan's rivers and irrigation canals have always been treacherous, particularly for children. Strong undercurrents, slippery banks, and sudden floods claimed countless lives, and the Kappa served as a way to explain these tragedies. Parents would warn their children not to play too close to the river's edge, lest a Kappa seize them. The story gave a face to danger, making the invisible currents visible in the form of a watchful predator. Yet for all their menace, the Kappa were also objects of laughter. Folklore paints them as curious and gullible, creatures bound by strange etiquette that could be turned against them. Despite their love of mischief, they were unfailingly polite. If bowed to, they were compelled to bow back, spilling the precious water from their heads and losing their strength. Some stories describe villagers keeping a cucumber inscribed with their name and tossing it into the river as an offering, satisfying the Kappa's appetite and keeping them away. Others tell of villagers tricking Kappa into promises or wagers, binding them by their own sense of honor. The Kappa's diet was said to be peculiar. They craved cucumbers, which became their favorite treat, but they also had a darker hunger for human blood and organs. One of the most unsettling details in the lore is their obsession with the shirikodama, a mythical ball said to reside in the human anus, which they would attempt to extract from drowning victims. This grotesque element underscores the duality of the Kappa's nature, comical in one moment, horrific in the next. Despite their dangers, Kappa were not always enemies. Some legends speak of individuals who befriended them, striking bargains that brought prosperity. A Kappa who was defeated or outwitted might pledge eternal loyalty, helping irrigate fields, bring fish, or share medical knowledge. In fact, some tales credit Kappa with introducing bone-setting techniques to humans, teaching the art of mending broken limbs. In this role, they were not just tricksters, but potential allies, as long as one treated them with respect and caution. The contradiction at the heart of the Kappa, half monster, half helper, reflects the relationship people had with water itself. Rivers were both life-giving and deadly. They irrigated fields, sustained fishing communities, and carried trade. But they also drowned the careless, flooded villages and swept away lives in an instant. To personify these waters in the form of a being that could both harm and help was a way of acknowledging this duality. The stories of Kappa were especially vivid in rural areas where rivers were central to daily life. Farmers left cucumbers at riverbanks as offerings. Children were told to stay away from still ponds where a Kappa might be lurking. Travelers crossing bridges at night might glimpse a figure below, its glowing eyes watching from the water. Over time, the image of the Kappa became so widespread that every region had its own variations. Some described them as more turtle-like, with hard shells on their backs. Others gave them monkey-like faces or skin covered in hair instead of scales. Yet the dish of water on their head remained constant, a symbol of both their power and their weakness. In art and literature, Kappa often straddle the line between fear and humor. Edo period prints show them peering mischievously from rivers, their bodies squat and childlike, their faces twisted in mischief. Popular stories told of them wrestling with humans, for they were said to delight in sumo. A Kappa might challenge a passerby to a match, only to be humiliated when tricked into spilling its headwater. These tales reveal a playful side to the folklore, one that allowed people to laugh at the very creatures they feared. The Kappa also appeared in more formal traditions. In medical texts, their supposed knowledge of anatomy was sometimes recorded. In legal documents, stories of Kappa attacks were occasionally treated as explanations for drownings or disappearances. Even shrines were built to appease them, blending folklore with religious practice. What makes the Kappa enduring is this versatility. They are not confined to one role. They are monsters, pranksters, teachers, and cautionary figures all at once. This flexibility allowed them to persist through centuries of cultural change. Even today, the Kappa remains one of the most recognizable yokai. Modern depictions in manga, anime, and film range from terrifying predators to comical mascots. Statues of them can be found by rivers in towns that once feared them, transformed from terrors into symbols of local identity. Yet beneath the modern charm lies the old fear. The stillness of a pond at dusk, the rush of a river after rain, the slippery edge of a marsh, all carry the memory of the Kappa's grip. The laughter in their stories does not erase the deaths they explain. Like the water itself, they cannot be trusted. The role of the Kappa also reveals something about the Japanese approach to the supernatural. Unlike in some traditions where monsters are wholly evil, here they are complex, bound by rules, capable of honor, and sometimes even worthy of respect. They are dangerous, yes, but also part of the order of things. To live alongside them is not to seek to destroy them, but to understand their nature and act accordingly. Their persistence in folklore, like that of the Yuki-Onna, speaks to the intimacy between people and their environment. Just as the snow gave rise to the woman of ice, so the rivers gave rise to the child of water. Each element of the landscape became animated in story, teaching lessons about survival, caution, and the unseen forces that shape human life. And so, from the rivers and marshes where the Kappa lurk, the path of folklore climbs once again into the mountains. Here, among towering pines and craggy cliffs, dwell beings very different from the childlike tricksters of the water. They are taller, prouder, and more fearsome, creatures of wind and storm whose watchful eyes glare down upon the valleys below. From the rivers where Kappa lurk, the landscape of folklore rises sharply into the high mountains where mists cling to the cliffs and ancient forests stretch endlessly across the ridges. Here, in the lonely peaks where only monks, hermits, and warriors dared to wander, another kind of being took shape in the imagination of Japan. These were the Tengu, creatures of immense pride, formidable strength, and tempestuous nature, whose stories reveal a complex blend of fear, respect, and uneasy reverence. The Tengu are among the most enduring and iconic of Japan's supernatural beings. Their forms have shifted over centuries, but their presence has always been tied to the mountains, to the liminal places where the human world meets the divine. The earliest depictions show them as bird-like demons, with wings, talons, and the faces of men twisted into beaks. Later, their image evolved into that of red-faced, long-nosed humanoids, towering and stern, more man than bird, but retaining the aura of otherworldliness. Even today, when people think of Tengu, it is this long-nosed visage that comes to mind, an image carved in countless masks and statues across shrines and festivals. The word Tengu itself carries echoes of older beliefs. It derives from Chinese traditions, where it referred to a celestial hound, a destructive comet spirit. In Japan, however, the figure transformed, absorbing local beliefs and Buddhist imagery until it became the mountain-dwelling entity we know today. They are beings of contradictions, both protectors and deceivers, both teachers and tormentors, both gods and demons. At their heart, Tengu are spirits of pride. They are said to be fallen monks, men whose arrogance in life caused them to be reborn not in hell, but as beings trapped between the human and divine worlds. Their nature reflects this origin. They are skilled in martial arts, versed in magic, and capable of great wisdom, yet they are also easily offended, quick to anger, and dangerous to those who show disrespect. To encounter a Tengu was to test not only one's strength, but one's humility. The mountains of Japan, with their dense forests and sacred peaks, were seen as places of spiritual trial. Monks sought enlightenment in their isolation. Warriors trained in secret among the cliffs, and villagers gazed upward with both awe and fear. The Tengu embodied the dangers and mysteries of these high places. They were said to sweep down in whirlwinds, carrying travelers into the sky, or to appear in the guise of wandering monks, offering cryptic lessons that might uplift or destroy. One of the most enduring tales of the Tengu is tied to Kurama, a mountain near Kyoto. It is here, according to legend, that the young warrior Minamoto no Yoshitsune was trained in the arts of war. Orphaned and living in exile, Yoshitsune encountered the Tengu of Kurama, who saw in him the potential for greatness. They taught him swordsmanship, strategy, and agility, shaping him into one of the most brilliant generals of his age. Whether the story is literal or metaphorical, It reflects the enduring idea that Tengu could grant knowledge, but only to those they deemed worthy. Yet the Tengu were not simply benevolent teachers. They were also tricksters and punishers of arrogance. Many stories describe monks or priests who grew too proud of their wisdom or power. These men would find themselves mocked, misled, or even abducted by Tengu, who delighted in humbling the haughty. In this way, the Tengu served as enforcers of humility, ensuring that those who sought spiritual elevation did not fall into the trap of pride. Their martial skill made them both feared and respected. Tales describe them wielding enormous fans made of feathers, capable of creating gusts of wind strong enough to topple houses or sweep men off cliffs. They were said to appear on battlefields, sometimes aiding the righteous, other times sowing confusion. Their presence was unpredictable, a reminder that power without humility could bring ruin. The association between Tengu and war is also reflected in their connection to Yamabushi, the mountain ascetics who practiced rigorous training in remote places. Yamabushi were often credited with supernatural abilities, their practices blending Buddhism, Shinto, and esoteric traditions. Over time, their appearance, long-nosed masks, robes, and conical hats, became linked with that of the Tengu. Some even believed that particularly powerful Yamabushi could transform into Tengu after death, their spirits elevated by their mastery, but corrupted by their pride. Despite their fearsome nature, Tengu were not wholly malicious. In some regions, they were seen as protectors of sacred mountains and shrines. Villagers might leave offerings to appease them, seeking their favor for good harvests or protection from disaster. Festivals often featured Tengu masks and dances, blending fear and celebration into a ritual of acknowledgement. This dual role reflects the complexity of the Tengu, not simply monsters to be avoided, but forces of nature and spirit to be respected. The long nose that defines their later imagery is itself symbolic. Scholars suggest it represents arrogance, the overinflated pride that leads to downfall. In theatrical performances, the exaggerated red mask of the Tengu is both comic and terrifying, a reminder of the danger of hubris. These masks remain popular in Japanese culture today, adorning shrines, festivals, and even tourist shops, a testament to the enduring fascination with these beings. Stories of Tengu often carry moral lessons. They punish arrogance, test humility, and reward discipline. A boastful warrior who mocked the mountains might find himself stranded, lost, and humbled after a Tengu led him astray. A diligent monk who persevered in his training might receive guidance or protection. The unpredictability of these encounters mirrors the unpredictability of the mountains themselves. Beautiful, dangerous, rewarding, and merciless all at once. Yet the Tengu were not confined to remote peaks. Folklore tells of them appearing in villages, sometimes to abduct children, sometimes to punish wrongdoers. They were said to strike at night, their wings beating in the darkness, their laughter echoing through the trees. In these stories, they blur the line between myth and nightmare, their presence as real as the storms that swept down from the mountains. The enduring fascination with Tengu is reflected in art and literature, from medieval scrolls depicting bird-like demons tormenting monks, to Edo period prints showing long-nosed figures striding through forests. They appear across centuries of Japanese creativity. Each depiction reflects the anxieties and values of its time, whether as demons of chaos, teachers of warriors, or guardians of sacred places. In modern culture, the Tengu remain a fixture. They appear in films, anime, and video games, sometimes as villains, sometimes as mentors, always carrying the aura of pride and strength. Their masks are worn at festivals, their statues guard temple gates, and their stories are told to children as both warnings and entertainments. The image of the long-nosed spirit, fierce and proud, continues to loom over the cultural landscape, as enduring as the mountains themselves. At their core, the Tengu embody the dangers of imbalance. Too much pride, too much arrogance, too much confidence in one's power. These lead to downfall. And yet, in their ability to teach, to guide, and to protect, they also embody the potential of discipline and humility. They are contradictions made flesh, creatures who mirror both the flaws and the strengths of humanity. From the quiet rivers of the Kappa to the stormy peaks of the Tengu, the folklore of Japan shifts its gaze once more, this time toward creatures closer to the human world. For while the Tengu soar in the mountains, the fox spirits known as Kitsune walk among people, blending into villages and homes, their magic woven into the fabric of daily life. Among the spirits that walk most closely with humankind in Japanese folklore, none are as captivating, as multifaceted, or as enduring as the fox spirits known as Kitsune. Unlike the monstrous Kappa who lurk in rivers, or the proud Tengu who reign over mountains, the Kitsune lives on the threshold of the human world, moving easily between the realm of spirits and the everyday lives of farmers, merchants, and nobles alike. They are shapeshifters, deceivers, lovers, and sometimes protectors, beings who embody both the dangers of illusion and the mysteries of magic. The fox has long been an object of fascination in cultures across the world. Its intelligence, its cunning, and its ability to survive in the shadows of human settlements gave it an air of the uncanny. In Japan, this perception deepened until it became something more. The ordinary fox of the forests and fields was seen not merely as an animal, but as a vessel of supernatural power. As the centuries passed, the fox grew into the Kitsune, a figure whose stories touch nearly every corner of Japanese folklore. At the heart of Kitsune lore is the power of transformation. They are said to take human form, most often that of a beautiful woman. In this guise, they wander into villages, inns, or homes, their presence so convincing that few ever suspect the truth. Some tales describe Kitsune, who marry human men, bear children, and live for years in secrecy, until the disguise slips or the truth is revealed. Others tell of brief encounters, where a traveler is lured by a mysterious woman, only to awaken in the wilderness, alone and mocked by laughter carried on the wind. In every story, the magic of the Kitsune lies in their ability to blur the line between human and spirit, reality and illusion. One of the most famous legends tells of Tamamo no Mae, a kitsune whose beauty and intelligence were said to be unparalleled. She entered the imperial court disguised as a noblewoman, enchanting all who met her with her grace and wit. Even the emperor himself fell under her spell. But behind her perfect mask lay a creature of immense power, a nine-tailed fox whose presence brought illness and disaster. When her deception was uncovered, she fled, pursued by warriors across the land. At last, she was slain, and her spirit sealed into the Sessho-seki, the killing stone, which even in death was said to bring death to any who touched it. This tale reveals the darker side of Kitsune, their power not only to deceive individuals but to imperil entire nations. The number of tails a kitsune bears is often a measure of its age, wisdom, and power. Ordinary foxes may have one, but as they grow older and more skilled, they sprout more, up to 9. The 9-tailed kitsune is the most powerful of all, a being whose magic rivals that of the gods. Such creatures are rare in folklore, but their presence looms large, symbols of the ultimate potential of fox spirits. They are not merely tricksters, but forces capable of reshaping destiny itself. Yet for all their danger, Kitsune are not always enemies. They exist on a spectrum that ranges from mischievous prankster to divine messenger. Some stories tell of Kitsune who repay kindness with loyalty, aiding farmers, protecting households, or blessing families with prosperity. These benevolent foxes are often associated with Inari, the Shinto kami of rice, fertility, and agriculture. Inari shrines across Japan are marked by fox statues, guardians who watch over the sacred grounds and carry the divine message of their master. In this role, the Kitsune becomes a link between the human and divine worlds, a creature not of deception but of devotion. The duality of Kitsune, both trickster and protector, reflects the complex relationship between people and the unseen world. On one hand, they warn of the dangers of illusion, of being led astray by desire or appearances. On the other, they embody the hope that kindness and respect can forge bonds even with the most mysterious of beings. To encounter a Kitsune could be a blessing or a curse, and one could never be certain which until it was too late. Their tricks are as varied as their forms. They are said to lead travelers astray with will-o'-the-wisp lights, a phenomenon known as kitsunebi or foxfire. At night, these ghostly flames flicker across fields and roads, drawing the curious into dangerous places. They delight in mocking the arrogant, humiliating the greedy, or playing harmless pranks on unsuspecting villagers. Yet the line between harmless and harmful is thin. A prank that leads a traveler into a river or a forest at night might end not in laughter, but in death. The motif of the Kitsune bride appears in many tales. A man encounters a woman of unusual beauty, marries her, and lives with her in happiness for years. Only later does he discover her true form, a fox in disguise. Often the revelation comes suddenly, through the slip of a tail, the flash of fur in moonlight, or the suspicion of neighbors. When the truth is revealed, the Kitsune departs, sometimes leaving behind children who embody both human and supernatural traits. These stories are bittersweet, filled with both love and loss, and they speak to the fragility of happiness built on illusion. Not all Kitsune tales end in tragedy. Some describe foxes who remain loyal even after their identity is exposed. In these cases, the foxwoman may continue to protect her husband and family from afar, visiting in dreams or watching unseen from the shadows. Such stories suggest that the line between spirit and human is not impassable, that bonds of love can bridge even the gulf between worlds. The influence of Kitsune in Japanese culture extends beyond folklore into religion, art, and theatre. Inari shrines remain among the most visited in Japan, their red torii gates stretching in endless rows, their fox statues draped with votive bibs offered by worshippers. The fox here is not feared, but honoured, its cunning and power harnessed in service of a deity who sustains life. Festivals dedicated to Inari often feature performers dressed as foxes, their masks blending playfulness with solemnity, reminding participants of the spirit's dual nature. In No and Kabuki theatre, Kitsune stories were dramatized with elaborate costumes and masks, the performers shifting between human and fox with sudden, graceful gestures. The magic of transformation was brought to life before audiences, who saw not only the humor of the fox's tricks, but the tragedy of its deceptions. These performances cemented the Kitsune's place in the cultural imagination, ensuring their stories would endure far beyond the villages where they first arose. The fascination with Kitsune did not fade with time. Even in the modern era, they appear in literature, film, anime, and games, sometimes as villains, sometimes as heroes, sometimes as romantic figures whose allure remains irresistible. Their image continues to evolve, but the core remains the same, a being of intelligence, mystery, and magic, straddling the boundary between worlds. At their essence, Kitsune reveal a truth about human fears and desires. They show the peril of being deceived by appearances, the danger of longing for what cannot be possessed. They also show the possibility of friendship, loyalty, and love that transcend the ordinary. This balance between danger and wonder, between fear and fascination, is what has made them so enduring in the Japanese imagination. From the laughter of their pranks to the sorrow of their departures, the Kitsune's stories continue to shimmer like foxfire in the night. And as we leave their flickering flames behind, the path of folklore winds deeper into the forests, where another shapeshifter waits. This one is not graceful or elegant, but round-bellied and mischievous, a creature of laughter and drink whose tricks are more comical than deadly. From the flickering foxfire of the Kitsune, the path of folklore drifts into the forests and low hills, where another shapeshifter makes its home. Unlike the fox, whose elegance and allure inspire both fear and admiration, the Tanuki embodies a very different spirit. Round-bellied, jovial, and endlessly mischievous. The Tanuki is a creature of laughter and trickery, a being who reflects the more playful, chaotic side of the supernatural world. The real-world Tanuki, or Japanese raccoon dog, is a nocturnal animal, small and shaggy, with bright eyes and a curious nature. To villagers living close to the forests, it was a familiar sight, slipping between trees or rummaging in fields. Its mysterious habits, its cries in the night, and its ability to vanish quickly into the undergrowth gave rise to stories that transformed it into something more than an animal. Over centuries, the ordinary raccoon dog became the folkloric Tanuki, a shapeshifter whose powers rival those of the Kitsune, but whose nature leaned less toward danger and more toward mischief. At the heart of Tanuki lore is transformation. Like the Kitsune, Tanuki are said to change their shape at will, creating illusions so convincing that humans cannot distinguish them from reality. They can become men, women, priests, teapots, even entire temples if they choose. Their magic is whimsical and absurd, often aimed not at destruction, but at playful trickery. Travelers walking alone at night might find themselves entering what appears to be a bustling inn, only to wake in the morning lying on a riverbank with stones for pillows. Merchants might pay for fine goods, only to discover the next day that they had been given leaves disguised as coins. The Tanuki delights in deception, but its deceptions usually end not in death, but in humiliation and laughter. One of the most enduring images of the Tanuki is its belly. Folklore describes them as drumming on their round stomachs like instruments, producing sounds that echo across the night. Some tales claim that Tanuki stretch their bellies into magical skins, transforming them into ships' sails, umbrellas, or drums used to entertain themselves and others. The imagery is strange, humorous, and deeply characteristic of Tanuki lore, which revels in the absurd rather than the terrifying. The Tanuki is also infamous for another feature often exaggerated in art and story: its enormous testicles, said to be expandable and shape-shifting like its belly. In folklore, these were not obscene but humorous, transformed into tools, sacks, or even disguises. Woodblock prints from the Edo period gleefully depict Tanuki using them as sails, blankets, or weapons, celebrating their ridiculous creativity. This bawdy humor made them favorites in popular culture, embodying a kind of earthy, mischievous joy that contrasted with the elegance of Kitsune or the menace of Oni. Yet beneath their comical appearance lies a deeper meaning. The Tanuki represents abundance, prosperity, and luck. In villages, statues of plump, smiling Tanuki holding sake bottles and promissory notes were placed outside shops and homes, not as warnings, but as charms for good fortune. These statues, still seen today outside restaurants and businesses, depict the Tanuki not as a monster, but as a jovial guardian of prosperity. Their presence reflects the way folklore can transform fear into fortune, turning a trickster spirit into a cultural mascot. Despite their generally light-hearted reputation, some Tanuki tales do lean into darker territory. A Tanuki's tricks could sometimes endanger the unwary. Stories describe hunters or woodcutters lured deep into the forest by illusions, only to become lost for days. Others tell of Tanuki disguising themselves as monks or priests, mocking religion or taking advantage of villagers' generosity. In these stories, the Tanuki is less a friend and more a chaotic force, undermining order with its constant play. One particularly well-known legend is the Bunbuku Chagama, or the tea kettle of endless fortune. In this story, a poor man rescues a Tanuki from harm. In gratitude, the creature transforms itself into a magical tea kettle that produces endless hot water. The man grows wealthy from the kettle's power, but eventually the Tanuki reveals itself again, dancing joyfully while balancing on the kettle's spout. This tale highlights the Tanuki's dual role as trickster and benefactor, a creature whose magic can bring both chaos and prosperity. Another darker legend tells of a Tanuki who was hunted by a man and sought revenge. Disguising itself as the man's wife, it tricked him into killing her, only to reveal the deception afterward. In retaliation, the man tracked down and killed the Tanuki. This tragic tale, known as the story of the Kachikachi-yama, underscores the more sinister side of Tanuki lore, where deception crosses the line into cruelty and violence. Yet even here, the story retains a folkloric strangeness, with the Tanuki often depicted using comical tricks before its grim fate. The Tanuki's popularity in art and performance helped cement its role in culture. In kabuki plays and humorous tales, it appeared as a bumbling shapeshifter, often outwitted by humans or mocked for its antics. In woodblock prints, artists delighted in illustrating its transformations, portraying them with wild creativity and humor. Unlike the fearsome images of Oni or the sorrowful depictions of Yūrei, Tanuki art embraced playfulness, making them figures of laughter as much as legend. Religiously, the Tanuki's role is less defined than that of the Kitsune. While foxes are tied closely to Inari shrines, Tanuki are more secular, existing in the margins between sacred and profane. Their statues outside businesses are more commercial than spiritual, symbols of prosperity rather than divine messengers. Yet this does not lessen their cultural significance. If anything, it makes them more approachable, a folkloric figure that belongs to the everyday as much as to the mystical. The Tanuki also reflects the Japanese love of paradox. They are foolish yet wise, comical yet dangerous, selfish yet generous. Their stories capture the unpredictability of life, the way fortune can change in an instant, the way appearances deceive, and the way joy and sorrow intertwine. Unlike the solemn lessons of the Tengu or the tragic warnings of the Onryō, Tanuki tales invite laughter even in their darkest moments, reminding listeners that the world is not always ordered and that chaos has its own place in the grand design. In the modern era, the Tanuki has thrived as a cultural icon. Restaurants and shops often display ceramic statues of smiling Tanuki with round bellies, straw hats, and bottles of sake, welcoming customers with promises of good luck. In literature and film, they appear as both comic relief and central figures. Studio Ghibli's Pompoko famously portrayed Tanuki as shape-shifting guardians of the forest, using their magic to resist urban development. Here, they are both whimsical and tragic, reflecting the tension between tradition and modernity. Through all these transformations, the essence of the Tanuki remains constant, a creature of trickery, humor, and unpredictability. Whether drumming on its belly in the moonlight, transforming into a teapot to fool a merchant, or standing plump and smiling outside a shop, the Tanuki carries forward a legacy of play that balances the darker corners of folklore. From the foxfires of the Kitsune to the laughter of the Tanuki, the shapeshifters of Japan reveal the power of illusion, the joy of trickery, and the endless fascination with beings that blur the line between human and spirit. Yet even in their humor, the world of folklore reminds us that the night holds stranger shapes still. And in the dim hours, when lamps flicker and shadows stretch, whispers tell of beings whose bodies themselves transform in unsettling ways. Women whose necks stretch impossibly long, bending in the darkness as they peer into the lives of the unsuspecting. In the dim glow of lamps, when the world grows still and the only sound is the creak of wood or the rustle of night wind, there are stories of beings who do not appear monstrous at first glance. They look like ordinary women, quiet and unassuming, living among neighbors without suspicion. Yet when darkness deepens and sleep closes the eyes of the house, their secret is revealed. Their necks begin to stretch, impossibly long, snaking out into the shadows, while their bodies remain motionless on the futon. They are the Rokurokubi, figures whose strangeness lies not in a grotesque appearance, but in the terrifying disruption of what seems familiar. The Rokurokubi are unlike the fox spirits or the Tanuki, who are recognized by their tricks and disguises. These women carry their curse within themselves, often without choice or awareness. By day, they appear completely normal, daughters, wives, neighbors, indistinguishable from those around them. But when night falls, their bodies betray them. Their necks extend, sometimes only a few feet, other times long enough to wind through hallways, out windows, or even across entire houses. Their heads drift silently through the night air, watching, feeding, or haunting in ways that make them some of the most uncanny figures in Japanese folklore. There are two distinct kinds of Rokurokubi described in the lore. The first are those whose necks stretch but remain attached to the body. These are the ones most often spoken of. The image of a woman's head floating across a room while her body lies asleep. The second type are sometimes called Nukakubi, whose heads detach entirely from the body and fly freely, sometimes to feed on blood or frighten the living before returning at dawn. Though similar in essence, the Rokurokubi and Nukakubi reflect different shades of the same fear, that the familiar can split apart, revealing something deeply unnatural within. The origin of these beings is often tied to curses or karmic retribution. Some tales claim they are women punished for sins in a past life, doomed to wander in this unnatural form. Others describe them as victims of sorcery or illness, their transformation an affliction rather than a choice. In either case, they are often portrayed with a degree of sympathy. Unlike the Onryō, who embrace vengeance, or the Yuki-Onna, who embody cold beauty, the Rokurokubi are more often tragic figures, caught in a cycle they cannot control. The stories vary in tone. Some describe Rokurokubi, who use their powers to frighten or harm. A traveler might lodge at an inn, only to awaken in the night to see a woman's head hovering near, her eyes wide and glowing, her neck stretched out of sight. Others portray them as harmless or even oblivious, their heads wandering unknowingly while they sleep, peering into neighbors' rooms or startling passers-by. In these versions, the horror lies less in malice than in the eerie, involuntary strangeness of their condition. One folktale tells of a samurai traveling through a remote region who stayed at a humble inn. He noticed that the innkeeper's wife seemed oddly weary, her eyes heavy as though from sleeplessness. In the middle of the night, he was startled awake by a strange sensation and saw her head hovering above him, her neck stretching from the futon where her body still lay. Realizing what she was, he fled, only to discover later that she was not even aware of her condition. This story highlights the uncanny nature of the Rokurokubi, whose horror is amplified by the fact that they live normal lives without knowing what they become when night falls. In other stories, however, the Rokurokubi are fully conscious of their abilities. These versions cast them in darker roles, wandering at night to terrify villagers, drink the blood of animals, or feed on the life force of sleeping humans. The image of a head drifting through the dark, lips parted to drain vitality from the unsuspecting, transforms them from victims into predators. This duality makes the Rokurokubi difficult to define, sometimes cursed innocents, sometimes monsters in their own right. The imagery of the Rokurokubi has fascinated storytellers and artists for centuries. In woodblock prints, they are shown with impossibly long necks, coiling like serpents, their heads peering into rooms, hovering over startled men, or twisting into grotesque shapes. The visual power of these images lies in their contrast. The delicate features of a woman's face paired with the unnatural distortion of the body. They are not grotesque in the manner of demons, but uncanny. Their strangeness rooted in the disruption of normal form. Theatre, too, embraced their unsettling presence. In certain kabuki plays, special effects allowed actors' necks to extend, creating moments of shock and wonder for audiences. The spectacle of a familiar human shape suddenly transformed into something alien captured the essence of the Rokurokubi myth. Ordinary on the surface, extraordinary and terrifying beneath. Scholars often interpret Rokurokubi tales as reflections of social fears and anxieties. In a society where women's roles were tightly constrained, the image of a wife or daughter who appeared dutiful by day but harbored a supernatural secret by night resonated deeply. It suggested the possibility of hidden lives, of suppressed desires, or sins that emerged only in darkness. At the same time, the involuntary nature of many Rokurokubi stories pointed to fears of illness, sleep disorders, or unexplained phenomena that could be reimagined as supernatural afflictions. The Rokurokubi also reflect broader themes in Japanese folklore. The idea that the ordinary can mask the extraordinary, that what seems familiar may conceal danger. Unlike Oni or Tengu, who inhabit remote places, the Rokurokubi live within communities, hidden in plain sight. They remind listeners that the supernatural need not come from distant mountains or deep forests, but could be sleeping in the very house next door. Despite their eerie nature, not all Rokurokubi tales are fearful. Some lean into humor, depicting women whose necks stretch while they sleep, leading to comical mishaps or misunderstandings. In these stories, the strangeness is softened, transformed into a source of laughter rather than dread. This variation reflects the flexibility of folklore, where the same figure can serve as a cautionary tale, a source of horror, or an object of amusement, depending on the storyteller's intent. Over time, Rokurokubi have remained present in Japanese culture, though often overshadowed by more famous spirits like the Kitsune or Yūrei. Still, their image lingers in art, literature, and modern media. Anime, films, and manga occasionally feature Rokurokubi, emphasizing their unsettling transformations or using them as symbols of hidden strangeness. Their presence reminds audiences that horror does not always come from overt monstrosity, but from the subtle distortion of the familiar. What makes the Rokurokubi particularly haunting is their liminality. They are caught between human and monster, between innocence and guilt, between victim and predator. They embody the fear that those we think we know may not be what they seem, that secrets lurk in the most ordinary places. Their stories unsettle not through violence, but through uncertainty, through the creeping realization that the line between normal and unnatural can be crossed without anyone noticing until it is too late. From the laughter of the Tanuki to the eerie silence of the Rokurokubi, the path of folklore shifts once again, moving from the uncanny strangeness of stretching necks to something far more visceral. For in the darkness of battlefields and the silence of mass graves, other beings rise. Giant skeletons formed from the bones of the hungry dead, towering figures whose hollow eyes glare down upon the living. In the shadows of folklore, where spirits whisper and monsters wander, some beings loom larger than all the rest, literally larger, towering over the world of the living with a form so vast and terrible that no human could hope to resist them. Among these, none inspire the same awe and dread as the Gashadokuro, the giant skeleton of the hungry dead. If the Rokurokubi unsettled with its quiet, uncanny strangeness, the Gashadokuro terrifies with sheer size, a manifestation of hunger and death magnified to impossible scale. The name itself reveals its nature. Gasha, or Gaki, refers to the hungry ghosts of Buddhist lore, spirits cursed to eternal craving for what they cannot have. Dokuro means skull or skeleton. Together, the Gashadokuro is the skeleton born of hunger, a being shaped not from a single death, but from many, a collective spirit of famine, war, and neglect. It is not one soul, but the merging of countless ones, each starved in life, bound together in resentment, rising from the earth as a monstrous form. The Gashadokuro is said to stand 15 times taller than an ordinary man, its body composed of bones fused into a towering skeleton. Its eye sockets burn with ghostly light, and its jaw gapes wide enough to swallow a person whole. Moving silently through the night, it hunts the living, crushing them beneath its bony hands or devouring them in a single bite. Its coming is marked by the sound of rattling bones echoing in the darkness, though some stories claim it can move without sound, striking without warning. The origins of the Gashadokuro are rooted in real suffering. In times of famine, plague, or war, when bodies lay unburied in fields or by roadsides, when hunger gnawed at entire villages, people turned to stories to explain the overwhelming sense of despair. The dead, neglected and restless, were imagined as combining into a single force of vengeance. The Gashadokuro embodied the idea that starvation and abandonment do not end with death, but return, magnified, punishing the living for their failures. One of the earliest and most vivid depictions of a Gashadokuro appears in Edo period artwork, where it rises from the darkness behind a warrior, its skull enormous, its jaw gaping in hunger. This image captures the terror of the creature, not simply its size, but its sudden emergence, the way it materializes from the unseen world like a nightmare given form. The Gashadokuro does not linger in villages or forests like other yokai. It rises directly from the ground, a reminder of the corpses buried or left unburied beneath the soil. The creature's hunger is insatiable. It is said to seek out lone travelers at night, seizing them and drinking their blood. Unlike smaller spirits, which can sometimes be warded off with charms, offerings, or prayers, the Gashadokuro is nearly impossible to resist. Its sheer power makes it immune to ordinary human defenses. The only hope of survival, according to some traditions, is to hear the faint clattering of bones in time to flee before it strikes. But few are so lucky. Yet for all its terror, the Gashadokuro is not entirely mindless. In some stories, it is driven not only by hunger, but by rage, particularly the rage of those who died unjustly. Victims of war who were never buried, peasants who starved while the wealthy hoarded grain, soldiers who perished forgotten on battlefields. All of these wrongs fed the creation of the Gashadokuro. In this sense, it is not only a monster, but a symbol, a reminder of human cruelty and neglect. The Buddhist influence on its legend is unmistakable. In Buddhist cosmology, hungry ghosts suffer because of insatiable cravings born from greed or misdeeds in life. The Gashadokuro magnifies this concept to a cosmic scale. It is not one ghost, but thousands, joined together in endless craving, unable to find peace. Its enormity reflects the enormity of the suffering that created it. In this way, the Gashadokuro is both supernatural monster and moral lesson, warning of the consequences of failing to honor the dead and of the devastating effects of hunger and war. Art and performance amplified its image. Artists of the Edo period, fascinated by the grotesque and the uncanny, depicted the Gashadokuro in woodblock prints, its massive form rising behind human figures, dwarfing them into insignificance. The theatre too found ways to evoke its presence, using shadows, sound effects, and sudden appearances to create the sense of a skeleton larger than life. Audiences were gripped not only by fear, but by awe, marveling at the scale of the supernatural. Despite its terrifying power, the Gashadokuro has rarely been portrayed as invincible. Some stories describe priests or shamans who managed to disperse it with powerful prayers, separating the spirits that formed it and granting them rest. In others, the creature eventually collapses under its own weight, dissolving back into the earth when its rage burns out. These variations reflect the hope that even the greatest horrors can be undone, that peace can be restored to the restless dead if they are finally acknowledged and honored. The image of the Gashadokuro also resonated with the collective memory of disasters. During times of war and famine in Japan, people were surrounded by death on a massive scale. Entire villages might be wiped out by starvation. Battlefields might be littered with corpses left unclaimed. In such contexts, the Gashadokuro became more than myth. It became a way of making sense of overwhelming loss, a vision of death itself made visible in the form of a towering skeleton. Even in modern times, the Gashadokuro remains one of the most striking figures in Japanese folklore. It appears in manga, anime, and video games as a symbol of overwhelming power, often as an enemy too large for ordinary heroes to defeat. Its image of bones fused into a giant resonates with universal fears of death, decay, and insignificance in the face of forces larger than ourselves. What distinguishes the Gashadokuro from other spirits is not only its scale, but its origin. It is not born of a single story, a single betrayal, or a single tragedy. It is born of many, of the collective suffering of countless individuals. In this way, it embodies communal memory, the way entire societies are scarred by famine, plague, and war. It reminds us that the dead are not easily forgotten, and that neglect has consequences far beyond the grave. From the eerie stretching necks of the Rokurokubi to the towering bones of the Gashadokuro, Japanese folklore shifts from uncanny intimacy to overwhelming enormity. Yet the world of spirits is not always vast or distant. Some beings dwell not in mountains or battlefields, but in the very heart of the household, slipping unnoticed into kitchens and living rooms, assuming authority over spaces that should belong to the living. And so the path turns next to the Nurarihyon, the master of the haunted household, whose presence reveals that the supernatural can claim dominion not only over nature, but over the hearth itself. After the towering form of the Gashadokuro fades back into the darkness, the scale of folklore shifts once again. No longer are we looking upward in awe at giants, nor outward to mountain storms or river currents. Instead, the gaze returns inward, into the household itself, into the quiet spaces of daily life where warmth, food, and family should offer comfort. Yet even here, the world of spirits intrudes. Some beings thrive not in forests or fields, but in the very heart of human homes. Chief among these is the Nurarihyon, the strange master of the haunted household, whose power lies not in brute strength or terror, but in the unsettling authority he claims over what is not his. The Nurarihyon is one of the more peculiar figures in Japanese folklore. He is usually described as an old man, small in stature but with an oddly gourd-shaped or bulbous head. His appearance is at once comical and unsettling, an elderly figure with a wrinkled face, sharp eyes, and an air of quiet confidence. Unlike monstrous spirits with claws or fangs, he carries no obvious threat. Yet his power is in presence. He walks into homes uninvited, sits at the head of the table, and behaves as though he is the master of the house. The family, confused or entranced, does not resist. Instead, they serve him tea, offer him food, and treat him as though he belongs. By the time anyone realizes the intrusion, he has vanished, leaving behind only unease. This strange behavior defines the Nurarihyon's role in folklore. He is not a spirit of violence or vengeance, but of intrusion and control. Where the Kappa tests respect for water and the Kitsune tests susceptibility to illusion, the Nurarihyon tests the sanctity of the home. His presence forces people to confront the unsettling idea that even their most private and protected spaces are not immune to spirits. The origins of his legend are somewhat obscure. Some traditions tie him to the Sato Inland Sea, where fishermen claim to see strange figures floating in the waves, resembling old men with oversized heads. These beings, when brought aboard, were said to take command of the ship, ordering the crew about as though they were the rightful captains. Over time, this maritime figure merged with household legends, creating the image of a being who assumes authority wherever he goes. Whether on sea or land, the Nurarihyon's essence is the same. He does not attack, but he takes over. In this way, the Nurarihyon differs from many other yokai. He is less a monster than a parasite of social order, slipping into spaces where he does not belong and bending others to his will. The subtlety of this intrusion is what makes him disturbing. Unlike an oni who smashes down doors, he simply walks through them, and the household accepts it without protest. His power is not force, but the uncanny ability to make others comply. This aspect of the Nurarihyon has made him a symbol of authority within the world of yokai. Later folklore and modern interpretations often portray him as the leader of yokai clans, a figure who rules not by violence, but by charisma and cunning. In these depictions, he becomes the supreme commander of the supernatural, the one who unites spirits under his influence. This role reflects his original power, the ability to assume control without resistance. If he can walk unchallenged into a human home, why not into the leadership of spirits as well? In Edo period art, the Nurarihyon appears in collections of yokai illustrations, often seated comfortably in a human home, sipping tea as though he had lived there his whole life. His oddly shaped head and smug demeanor make him instantly recognizable. Some prints depict families bowing to him or serving him with puzzled expressions, emphasizing the unsettling charm that allows him to dominate without fear. These images capture both the humor and the unease of his legend. He is ridiculous in form, yet impossible to ignore. Stories of the Nurarihyon often carry a satirical edge. In a society where social hierarchy was strict, the idea of a stranger walking in and assuming the role of master reflected anxieties about authority, status, and control. The Nurarihyon exposes the fragility of these systems, showing how easily people can be manipulated into obedience. His tales remind listeners that power does not always come from rightful position or strength, but from the ability to command presence and bend others to recognition. At the same time, he embodies the fear of intrusion. The home is supposed to be a place of safety, protected by rituals and boundaries. The Nurarihyon crosses those boundaries without effort, reminding people that the supernatural can reach even into their most intimate spaces. He is not destructive like fire or storm, but invasive, eroding the very sense of security that home should provide. In some interpretations, the Nurarihyon is more malevolent. He is said to slip into homes not only to drink tea, but to drain vitality, feeding on the life force of families who unknowingly serve him. In these stories, his intrusion is not harmless, but parasitic, leaving households weakened after his visits. This darker version amplifies the unease, turning him from comical intruder to predator who masks hunger with civility. Modern portrayals often expand on his role as a leader among yokai. In literature, manga, and anime, he is frequently cast as a patriarchal figure, commanding respect among other spirits. His cunning and charisma make him a natural organizer, turning the chaotic world of monsters into something resembling a community. Yet even in this elevated role, the essence of the Nurarihyon remains unchanged. He assumes control effortlessly, whether over a household, a ship, or an army of spirits. The Nurarihyon's endurance in folklore reflects the fascination with subtle power. Unlike spirits who terrify with their appearance or violence, he unsettles by exposing the weakness of social and personal boundaries. He forces us to consider how easily authority can be claimed, how quickly people can be compelled to obey, even when the one giving orders has no rightful claim. In this way, the Nurarihyon becomes more than a curious household intruder. He becomes a reflection of human vulnerability to manipulation, a supernatural embodiment of the conman, the usurper, the self-appointed leader whose authority is accepted without question. His legend reminds us that not all dangers announce themselves with claws or teeth. Some arrive quietly, smiling, and sit down at our tables as though they belong. From the towering skeletons of the hungry dead to the quiet authority of the Nurarihyon, Japanese folklore demonstrates the wide range of fears that shape its stories. from the overwhelming force of death itself to the subtle intrusion of a stranger into the home. Yet the night holds other shapes still, figures not of authority or grandeur, but of eerie emptiness. For among the most unsettling of Japan's spirits are those who appear perfectly human, only to reveal the terrible absence of a face. After the smug authority of the Nurarihyon, who unsettles by claiming dominion over what is not his, the imagination turns to another kind of unease, one far more primal. This is not the intrusion of a stranger, nor the looming terror of a skeleton giant, but the terror of absence itself. Among the many spirits of Japanese folklore, few are as unnerving in their simplicity as the Noppera-bō, the faceless ones of the night. At first glance, the Noppera-bō seem ordinary. They take the form of everyday people, a traveler, a neighbor, a servant, a loved one. There is nothing about their clothing or posture to mark them as different. They walk the roads, sit in inns, or work quietly in fields. Yet when someone looks closer, when they turn to face their observer, their mask drops. Where eyes, nose, and mouth should be, there is nothing. Only smooth, pale skin stretches across their face, blank and unreadable, like a canvas that refuses to reveal identity. The horror of the Noppera-bō lies in this moment of revelation. Humans are wired to find meaning in faces, to read emotion, intent, and familiarity in the smallest details of eyes or lips. To see a blank surface where expression should be is to confront a void. It is not grotesque or bloody, but profoundly disorienting. The victim is left not with wounds, but with the shock of seeing humanity stripped away. One of the most enduring tales of the Noppera-bō takes place along the road to the temple of Kokoku-ji in Edo, the city that would later become Tokyo. The story tells of a man walking at night who encountered a woman weeping by the roadside. Concerned, he approached to comfort her, only for her to lift her face and reveal that it was utterly blank. Horrified, he fled, his heart pounding, and rushed home to tell his wife what he had seen. But when he looked upon her, she too turned toward him, her features dissolving into the same smooth void. The man collapsed in terror, undone not by violence, but by the sight of a world suddenly emptied of faces. This story captures the essence of the Noppera-bō's power. They do not strike or kill. They terrify by stripping away the most human part of the human form. Their attacks are psychological, leaving victims shaken, questioning their own perceptions. To encounter a faceless figure is to question reality itself. Is this truly a person? Is this truly the world I know? Or has something slipped into it? Something that mimics humanity but refuses to reveal itself? The origins of the Noppera-bō are varied. Some traditions describe them as independent Yōkai, spirits whose sole purpose is to frighten and confuse. Others link them to shapeshifters such as Kitsune or Tanuki, who disguise themselves as faceless humans to play cruel pranks. In either case, their role is less about physical harm and more about unsettling the boundaries between normal and abnormal, familiar and alien. The faceless image also resonates with Buddhist symbolism. In some interpretations, the Noppera-bō embody the concept of impermanence, the idea that identity and self are illusions. To look upon a blank face is to be reminded of the emptiness underlying existence, a truth as frightening as any monster. Whether this was a conscious origin or a later interpretation, it adds depth to their meaning, linking the uncanny with spiritual reflection. Artists of the Edo period delighted in depicting Noppera-bō, capturing the shock of a blank face revealed in lantern light. In ukiyo-e prints, They are often shown mid-reveal, turning towards startled companions, their smooth skin gleaming in contrast to the horrified expressions around them. The simplicity of the image made it powerful. No grotesque detail was needed, only the absence of what should be. Their presence in theatre and storytelling reinforced their impact. Ghost stories told during summer gatherings, known as kaiden, often featured the Noppera-bō as a favourite subject. Audiences thrilled at the suspense, the slow build to the moment when the mask of humanity fell away to reveal the void beneath. The scream that followed was not from bloodshed, but from the sudden collapse of trust in what seemed real. Modern culture has kept the Noppera-bō alive in new forms. Films and television sometimes reimagine them as sinister ghosts, stalking victims through streets or homes. In anime and manga, they appear both as eerie background spirits and as central figures, their facelessness used to symbolize anonymity, loss of identity, or hidden malice. Video games often use their blank faces as a simple yet effective design for enemies, evoking unease without the need for elaborate detail. What makes the Noppera-bō enduring is their universality. The fear of losing identity, of seeing the human form stripped of expression, resonates across cultures. They remind us that horror does not always need claws, blood, or violence. Sometimes the most frightening thing is the absence of what should be there. The Noppera-bō embody this absence, walking quietly through the night until they choose to turn and reveal it. Their role in folklore also reflects the fragility of trust. To see a loved one's face vanish into blankness is to question not only them, but the world itself. If identity can dissolve so easily, what else might be uncertain? The Noppera-bō shake the foundations of familiarity, turning the everyday into something alien. From the smug mastery of the Nurarihyon to the faceless terror of the Noppera-bō, Japanese folklore moves from intrusion to erasure. From the authority of a spirit who claims dominion to the emptiness of spirits who strip humanity itself away. And yet the world of Yōkai is vast, and among its strangest figures are those whose transformations are hidden not in the face, but in the body itself. Women who appear ordinary until the moment they reveal a second mouth opening at the back of the head, hungry and insatiable, whispering with a voice that should not exist. From the faceless Noppera-bō, who terrify by stripping identity away, the path of folklore moves deeper into the strange, into beings whose monstrousness is hidden, not on the surface of the face, but within the body itself. Among the most unsettling of these is the Futakuchi-Onna, the woman with two mouths. Her tale captures the fear of hidden hunger, of secrets concealed beneath appearances, and of the uncanny possibility that even those we think we know may harbour something alien and insatiable within them. At first sight, the Futakuchi-Onna appears completely ordinary. She is often described as beautiful, refined, and modest, a woman who fits perfectly into the roles expected of her in traditional society. Her front-facing features are normal: 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth like anyone else. Yet hidden beneath her long hair, at the back of her head, is another mouth, wide, gaping, and unnatural. This second mouth is lined with sharp teeth, its lips moving of their own accord, whispering in hunger when unsated. It speaks in a voice that is not the woman's own, demanding food, urging to be fed. When ignored, it becomes violent, writhing hair transforming into tendrils that seize food and stuff it into the mouth until its hunger is quenched. The origins of this grotesque figure vary, but nearly all versions are tied to the theme of greed, neglect, or hidden guilt. One common story tells of a miserly man who prided himself on thrift. He married a woman who, strangely, never seemed to eat. While the household grew wealthier from the food he saved, he noticed that supplies nonetheless dwindled. Unbeknownst to him, his wife's hidden second mouth was consuming it all in secret, her hair writhing like living hands to feed the insatiable maw at the back of her skull. In this version, the Futakuchi-Onna is not born monstrous, but becomes so, a reflection of her husband's greed and neglect, her body cursed to carry the hunger he refused to acknowledge. Another tale presents her transformation as punishment for cruelty. A man who mistreated his stepdaughter by starving her eventually remarried. His new wife appeared kind and dutiful, but one day, a mouth opened in the back of her head, speaking with the voice of the neglected child. This mouth demanded food endlessly, haunting the man with the hunger he had inflicted. In this telling, the Futakuchi-Onna embodies karmic retribution, the sins of the past given voice in the body of the present. Whatever the specific origin, the symbolism of the Futakuchi-Onna is clear. She represents concealed hunger, hidden need, and the consequences of neglect. Her two mouths reflect a dissonance between appearance and reality. Outwardly a perfect woman, inwardly a figure of endless appetite. She exposes the lies beneath social harmony, the truths people would rather keep hidden. Visually, she is among the most striking figures in folklore. Artists often depict her hair parting to reveal the gaping second mouth, its lips twisted into a grotesque grin. Sometimes strands of hair are shown as living appendages, lifting bowls of rice or pieces of fish to feed it. The image is at once absurd and horrifying, the familiar turned monstrous in a way that leaves little room for comfort. Unlike the elegant terror of the Yuki-Onna or the sly beauty of the Kitsune, the Futakuchi-Onna unsettles because she hides her strangeness until the moment it reveals itself. Her presence in folklore also reflects anxieties about women's roles in traditional society. In a world where women were expected to be modest, obedient, and restrained, the Futakuchi-Onna breaks the mold with her hidden hunger and her body's refusal to conform. Some scholars interpret her as a manifestation of male anxieties about women's needs and independence, the second mouth symbolizing desires that could not be controlled. Others see her as a metaphor for the hidden costs of greed, where the suppression of hunger only creates deeper cravings. Beyond metaphor, the Futakuchi-Onna also carried practical lessons. Food scarcity was a recurring concern in Japan, and waste or mismanagement could mean disaster for families. The tale of a woman whose hidden mouth consumed supplies in secret served as a cautionary tale about vigilance and the dangers of unchecked consumption. It warned households that appearances could deceive, that hidden causes might explain unexplained loss, and that greed and neglect always demanded payment. Not all portrayals of the Futakuchi-Onna are purely terrifying. In some regions, she appears more tragic than monstrous. The second mouth is seen not as her own fault, but as a curse placed upon her, a burden she must carry. These stories evoke sympathy for her plight, painting her not as a predator, but as a victim of circumstance, forced to live with an affliction that isolates her from the community. In these versions, her legend becomes a meditation on suffering, difference, and the hidden struggles that can exist behind a seemingly perfect exterior. In literature and theatre, she made occasional appearances, her grotesque form lending itself to the uncanny. The sudden reveal of the second mouth provided a shocking twist in ghost stories and moral tales alike. For audiences, She embodied the fear of hidden truths, the suspicion that what lies beneath appearances might be stranger than imagined. Modern culture has kept the Futakuchi-Onna alive, often reinterpreting her for new audiences. In manga and anime, she appears as both horror figure and comic character, her second mouth exaggerated for either fright or humor. Some stories emphasize the grotesque hunger, while others playfully depict her as a woman struggling with the inconvenience of a second mouth that demands snacks at inappropriate times. This flexibility reflects the adaptability of folklore, where even the most unsettling figures can be reshaped to fit new contexts. Yet beneath these reinterpretations, the core of her legend remains. The Futakuchi-Onna unsettles because she embodies what should not be: hunger without end, mouths where there should be none, needs that cannot be ignored. She reminds us that appearances deceive, that harmony can mask dissonance, and that the human form itself can conceal alien truths. From the blank faces of the Noppera-bō to the hidden mouth of the Futakuchi-Onna, Japanese folklore reveals its fascination with the uncanny distortions of the human body. Faces vanish, mouths multiply, and the line between familiar and monstrous blurs. But the world of yokai holds beings more overtly fearsome still, creatures who make no attempt to hide their nature, whose horns, clubs, and savage laughter announce their presence from afar. And so, from the concealed mouth we turn toward the Oni, demons of fire, iron, and punishment, whose legends echo with the clash of war and the weight of justice. From the hidden mouths of the Futakuchi-Onna, where hunger whispers in the dark, the world of folklore turns toward figures that hide nothing at all. These are creatures who stride openly through the stories, their monstrous nature on full display, their forms exaggerated into images of terror and brute strength. Few beings are as instantly recognizable or as deeply embedded in Japanese culture as the Oni, demons of fire, iron, and punishment. Their horns, tusks, and great iron clubs mark them as symbols of chaos and cruelty, but also as guardians and enforcers of cosmic justice. The Oni's image is unmistakable. They are huge, towering over humans, with muscular bodies covered in wild hair or sometimes colored skin, most often red or blue. Their faces are grotesque, with bulging eyes, sharp fangs, and horns jutting from their heads. Clad in animal skins, they wield massive iron clubs known as kanabo, weapons said to crush anything in their path. Their laughter is thunderous, their presence overwhelming. To see an Oni in folklore is to face raw, unrestrained force. Their origins stretch deep into religious and cultural currents. The very word Oni comes from an older root meaning hidden or concealed. In early times, Oni were not always depicted as horned demons, but as invisible forces of misfortune, the unseen hand behind plagues, famine, and disaster. Over centuries, their form crystallized into the horned ogres of popular imagination, shaped by Buddhist and Shinto influences, as well as imported concepts of demons from China and India. By the medieval period, Oni had become figures both feared and mythologized, embodying not only destruction, but punishment and balance. In Buddhist cosmology, Oni serve as enforcers of hell, tormenting the wicked after death. They boil souls in cauldrons, tear at them with claws, or beat them with clubs. Their role is not mindless cruelty, but karmic retribution, ensuring that those who sinned in life face justice in death. In this sense, Oni are less independent monsters and more servants of cosmic order. They embody the fear of punishment and the reminder that deeds do not vanish at the grave. Yet Oni are not confined to the underworld. In folklore, they appear in the human realm as marauders, raiding villages, kidnapping women, and devouring men. Their lairs are often deep in mountains or remote caves, places at the edges of the known world where danger was believed to lurk. Tales of Oni raids reflect real fears of bandits or invaders, magnified into myth. The Oni became a way to personify threats from outside the safety of the village, giving a face to the dangers that haunted the borders of society. One of the most famous Oni stories is that of Shutendoji, the demon king of Mount O. Said to be a monstrous leader of Oni who terrorized Kyoto, Shutendoji kidnapped women, drank sake endlessly, and grew in strength with every passing day. The emperor sent a band of warriors, led by Minamoto no Yorimitsu, to defeat him. Disguising themselves as mountain priests, they infiltrated his lair and tricked him into drinking poisoned sake. Once weakened, they struck, severing his head. But even in death, Shutendoji's head retained power, snapping its jaws and nearly killing his slayers before it was finally subdued. This story illustrates the resilience and terror of Oni, whose power lingers even after apparent defeat. Oni often appear as foes to be overcome by legendary heroes. Their defeat represents the triumph of order over chaos, of civilization over barbarism. Yet their role is not purely negative. In some contexts, Oni are seen as protectors, beings who guard sacred places or enforce discipline. Festivals such as Setsubun highlight this duality. During Setsubun, people throw roasted soybeans while shouting, "Oni wa soto, fuku wa uchi," demons out, fortune in, to drive away evil spirits and invite good luck. Here, Oni embody misfortune itself, expelled ritually to purify the home and welcome a prosperous year. At the same time, Oni have been used as figures of humor and satire. In woodblock prints and popular tales, they are sometimes shown as bumbling, easily tricked by clever humans, or defeated through wit rather than force. Their grotesque strength becomes almost comical, turned into a foil for human cunning. This flexibility has made them enduring figures in storytelling, shifting from objects of terror to characters of ridicule depending on the needs of the tale. Their symbolism is rich and layered. Oni represent the destructive power of nature, earthquakes, storms, and disease personified in monstrous form. They also represent human vices such as greed, rage, and cruelty, magnified into physical beings. In Buddhist teaching, to become an Oni after death is to fall into the deepest state of suffering, transformed by one's sins into a monster consumed by rage and hunger. Thus, Oni stories serve as moral lessons, warning of the consequences of unrestrained behavior. In art, Oni are ubiquitous, from Heian period scrolls depicting them tormenting souls in hell, to Edo period prints showing them cavorting in drunken revelry. They appear across centuries of visual culture. Masks of Oni, with their fierce expressions and bulging eyes, remain staples of No and Kabuki theatre, where they embody ferocity and fear. The long tradition of these depictions has ensured that Oni are among the most visually iconic of all Japanese spirits. In literature, Oni occupy both high and low forms. Classical tales depict them as antagonists in epic battles, while folk tales present them as obstacles for peasants or tricksters. In modern times, they continue to thrive in manga, anime, and games, where their horned figures and iron clubs retain the aura of strength and menace. Sometimes they are villains, sometimes reluctant allies, sometimes even heroes who embrace their monstrous power for a greater good. The endurance of Oni reflects their adaptability. They embody primal fears of destruction, but they also serve as mirrors of human behavior. Their brutality is both external and internal, a threat from outside and a reflection of the darkness within. They remind us that monsters are not only in caves or mountains, but in unchecked impulses and unrestrained cruelty. From the hidden hunger of the Futakuchi-Onna to the open ferocity of the Oni, the spectrum of Japanese folklore moves from secret monstrosity to overt demonhood. Yet even Oni, with their horns and clubs, are not the final word in the dance of death and spirit. Beyond them lies another presence, quieter but no less powerful, figures who do not attack with brute strength, but who stand at the threshold of life and death itself, whispering to the living and guiding them toward the end. These are the Shinigami, spirits of death and invitation, whose presence marks the final boundary that no human can escape. After the roar and clash of the Oni, who smash their way through stories with clubs and fire, the world of folklore turns toward a quieter presence, no less fearsome, but subtler, more inevitable. Where Oni embody brute strength and punishment, these spirits embody the one truth from which no human can escape: death itself. The Shinigami, spirits of death and invitation, move silently across the threshold between life and afterlife. They do not always strike with violence. More often, they whisper, they beckon, they lead the living down paths from which there is no return. The word Shinigami translates simply to death god or death spirit. Yet, unlike the Oni, whose imagery was shaped early and remained consistent, the Shinigami are more elusive, their origins tangled across time. They are not as firmly rooted in ancient Shinto belief as some other yokai, nor as clearly defined as Buddhist figures like the Oni of hell. Instead, they emerge gradually, shaped by imported ideas, local anxieties, and the evolving imagination of Japan. Their image reflects not one single origin, but a convergence of many influences. In Buddhist cosmology, death is presided over by King Enma, the ruler of the underworld, who judges souls after they pass. Around him are countless attendants and demons who enact punishment. Yet the specific figure of the Shinigami, spirits who actively appear in the human world to guide or tempt the dying, developed later, influenced in part by imported ideas of grim reapers and death guides from China and Europe. By the Edo period, the Shinigami had entered Japanese stories as distinct entities, figures who wander the night in search of those whose time has come. Unlike Western death gods, the Shinigami are not always portrayed as reapers wielding scythes. In many Japanese tales, they appear as shadows, or as ordinary figures encountered on lonely roads. Sometimes they resemble wandering monks or travelers, offering conversation or companionship until the moment they reveal their true nature. Their role is not always to seize life by force, but to invite it away. They lean close and whisper into the ear, telling the living that it is time to follow. The victim may feel drowsy, entranced, or compelled to walk, until they drift into death without resistance. This idea of invitation is central to their lore. Shinigami are not only agents of death, but also tempters. Some stories describe them luring people into suicide, whispering that the time is right, that despair is unavoidable, that the waters or the rope will bring release. In this form, they embody the darkest impulses of the human mind, externalized as spirits who guide hands toward destruction. In a society where suicide carried both stigma and ritual meaning, the Shinigami became a way to explain such deaths, attributing them not only to personal choice, but to spiritual manipulation. One folktale tells of a man who encountered a traveler at dusk. The traveler walked beside him, speaking gently of the burdens of life, of the ease of letting go. By the time the man realized that his companion cast no shadow, he was already at the edge of a cliff, his mind filled with thoughts of release. only a sudden prayer saved him. When he looked again, the traveler had vanished, leaving behind only the chill certainty that he had walked with a Shinigami. Not all depictions are sinister. In some traditions, Shinigami are simply guides, helping souls pass peacefully into the afterlife. They ensure that the dead do not wander, that they find their way to judgment or reincarnation. In this role, they resemble psychopomps from other cultures, beings who lead rather than destroy. Their presence is still unsettling, but not necessarily malicious. To see a Shinigami at the foot of the bed, according to some accounts, was to know that death was near, but also to know that one would not be alone in crossing over. Their ambiguity reflects the complexity of human attitudes toward death. Death is feared, but also inevitable. It can be violent, but it can also be release. The Shinigami embody both aspects, appearing as monsters in some tales, as necessary guides in others. They are at once terrifying and comforting, depending on how one views the end of life. In Edo period literature and theatre, the Shinigami took on more vivid roles. In kabuki plays, they were sometimes portrayed as shadowy figures manipulating human fates, whispering into the ears of those driven to despair. In ghost stories, they appeared as travelers or priests who revealed their true faces only when it was too late. These performances played on the tension between the ordinary and the extraordinary, the familiar and the terrifying. The Shinigami could be anyone, anywhere, hidden behind the most harmless of appearances. The influence of the Shinigami grew stronger in the modern period, where death itself became a subject of fascination and fear. In literature, they appeared as characters embodying fatalism. In film and anime, they were reimagined as grim reapers or gods of death in the Western mold. Sometimes sinister, sometimes humorous. Works like Death Note brought the Shinigami to global attention, portraying them as powerful, capricious beings who toy with human lives. Yet even in these modern reinventions, the core idea remains. Spirits tied to the inevitability of death, whether as guides, tempters, or overseers. The Shinigami also reveals something about cultural attitudes toward responsibility. By attributing sudden death or suicide to their influence, stories offered a way to understand tragedy without placing all the blame on the victim. The presence of a Shinigami externalized despair, framing it as an encounter with a force beyond human control. This made sense of the inexplicable, offering both caution and consolation. Artists often struggle to depict them since their form is less consistent than that of Oni or Kitsune. Some chose to show them as shadowy figures, others as ordinary humans whose faces are slightly wrong, eyes too deep, or smiles too thin. The ambiguity of their image only heightens their power. They are frightening not because they are grotesque, but because they could be anyone. The endurance of the Shinigami reflects the universality of their theme. Every culture grapples with death, and every culture imagines beings who oversee it. Japan's Shinigami are part of this global pattern, but with their own distinct character. Spirits who lean close and invite, whose danger lies not in force, but in persuasion. They remind us that death comes not only with violence, but also with whispers, with temptations, with the slow erosion of will. From the brute strength of the Oni to the quiet whispers of the Shinigami, Japanese folklore covers the full spectrum of fear, from external assault to internal surrender. And yet even these figures of death and inevitability are not the final word. For at the very edges of myth, in stories that reach back to Japan's earliest legends, there waits a being greater still, a monstrous serpent with 8 heads and 8 tails, a creature of primordial chaos whose defeat shaped the very foundations of the land. From whispers of death, the path of folklore turns toward the roar of the Yamata no Orochi, the final terror in this long journey through monsters, myths, and spirits. From the quiet whispers of the Shinigami, who beckon the living into death, the path of folklore reaches its widest point. No longer are we looking at single figures, fox spirits, faceless ones, skeleton giants, or mountain demons, but at the multitude itself. The Japanese imagination has never been limited to one monster or one story. It has created a world brimming with creatures, each with its own shape, its own appetite, its own presence. This collective is often described as the Yōkai, a host of beings that stretches endlessly, a living world of monsters and shadows. The word Yōkai is difficult to pin down. It can mean apparition, mystery, strange occurrence, or supernatural creature. In truth, it carries all of these meanings at once. A Yōkai might be a mischievous trickster, a terrifying predator, a comical nuisance, or a solemn guardian. Some are animal-like, others human-shaped, others too strange to fit either category. What unites them is not a single origin or form, but the sense that they belong to the unseen realm, that they move between the cracks of ordinary life and make themselves felt in ways the human world cannot ignore. The variety is staggering. We have already traced many of the most famous: the Kitsune with their foxfire and shapeshifting, the Kappa lurking in rivers, the Oni with their clubs and horns, the faceless Noppera-bō, the whispering Shinigami. Yet these are only fragments of a much larger whole. Beyond them are countless others, some known only in a single region, some carried across the islands in popular tales. The umbrella Yōkai covers all of them, a word that embraces the vastness of supernatural imagination. Part of their richness comes from Japan's relationship with nature. Mountains, rivers, forests, and seas all hold power, beauty, and danger. People living close to these landscapes saw spirits in every ripple of water, every flicker of firelight, every shadow cast by the moon. To explain the strange and unpredictable, they gave shape to it. A sudden gust of wind became the work of a Tengu's fan. A misstep on a dark road was blamed on a Tanuki's illusion. An illness with no visible cause might be said to come from a malicious spirit. In this way, Yōkai grew not only from imagination, but from the everyday struggle to live with forces beyond human control. Yet Yōkai are not only about fear. Many embody humor, absurdity, or playfulness. There are Yōkai who lick the filth from ceilings, who haunt abandoned umbrellas, who slip into baths uninvited. These are not figures of horror, but of amusement, ways to make sense of inconveniences and accidents with laughter rather than dread. The host of Yōkai reflects not only anxieties, but also the human need to laugh at the strange, to find joy in the absurd. Art played a crucial role in giving the Yōkai host its shape. During the Edo period, picture scrolls and woodblock prints collected and catalogued them, presenting them as a grand parade of monsters. These haki-yagyo, the night parades of 100 demons, show Yōkai marching together in endless procession, a carnival of the supernatural. In these images, the diversity of the host is clear. Grotesque faces, elegant foxes, comical objects come to life, faceless women, stretching necks, all mingled together in a single file. The sight is not of chaos, but of a strange community, a world parallel to the human one. The concept of the Yōkai host reflects the idea that the supernatural is not isolated, but communal. Just as humans form villages and cities, spirits form gatherings and parades. Their world is alive, bustling, filled with its own hierarchies and relationships. Some tales even suggest that when humans sleep, the yokai rise and march across the land, their laughter and chatter carried on the night wind. This vision of a living, breathing host turns the supernatural from isolated incidents into an entire ecosystem. What makes the yokai host fascinating is its inclusiveness. It is not limited to grand demons or ancient spirits. Everyday objects, once old and worn, could transform into tsukumogami, yokai born from tools and belongings that gained souls after 100 years. An umbrella might sprout an eye and hop about. A teapot might walk on legs. A scroll might unroll itself in the night. These stories reflect both a sense of humor and a respect for material objects, a belief that even the mundane carries life within it. The yokai host also reflects the human tendency to personify fears and desires. Greed becomes a woman with a second mouth. Pride becomes a Tengu sweeping down from the mountains. Hunger becomes a skeleton giant. Love and betrayal become vengeful Onryō. Each emotion, each danger, each unexplained occurrence finds form in a yokai, turning abstract forces into beings that can be seen, named, and told in stories. The host is a mirror of humanity itself, distorted but recognizable. Festivals keep this vision alive. Across Japan, events still feature yokai processions, where people dress in elaborate costumes to recreate the night parade. These gatherings blur the line between play and reverence, between celebration and fear. They acknowledge the presence of the host not as something to be denied, but as something to be honored, laughed at, and included in the cycle of life. In literature and theatre, the yokai host became a canvas for creativity. Writers could populate their stories with endless figures, each with its own traits, creating worlds where humans and spirits constantly intersect. The sheer number of yokai allowed for endless variation, from frightening ghost stories to comic tales, from moral lessons to flights of absurd imagination. The host was not a closed system, but an ever-expanding one, with new yokai invented, discovered, or reinterpreted across generations. Modern culture continues this tradition. Manga, anime, and video games team with yokai, sometimes faithful to old depictions, sometimes reimagined for new audiences. Series like Gegege no Kitaro helped revive interest in them, portraying the yokai host as a living community with its own politics and dramas. In these modern visions, the host is not merely background, but a stage for storytelling, where every creature, no matter how obscure, has a role to play. The endurance of the yokai host reveals something essential about human imagination. By gathering all these beings under one term, Japanese culture acknowledges the vastness of the unseen. The world is not simply divided into human and divine, natural and unnatural. There is a middle realm, teeming with creatures who reflect the complexity of life itself. The host is not orderly, but neither is it chaos. It is the strange mirror of human society, filled with its own contradictions, humor, terrors, and delights. From the whispers of Shinigami to the laughter of Tanuki, from the elegance of Kitsune to the ferocity of Oni, the host embraces all. Each creature is a fragment, and together they form a tapestry of imagination. The yokai host is not simply a list of monsters, but a living world, one that grows and changes as people tell and retell its stories. And as we walk away from these tales, it is not with the sense of leaving them behind, but with the recognition that they walk alongside us. The parade of shadows continues. just beyond the corner of the eye, in the rustle of leaves, in the flicker of lanterns, in the laughter that echoes faintly in the night. The host of yokai is never far, for they are woven into the very fabric of how people see the world, a reminder that mystery, fear, and wonder are always close at hand.